A breath of air leaves a small glass bubble shimmering at the end of a cane, and the first light of morning slides across its skin like watered silk. Sand that slept ashore an hour ago now glows honey-soft beside a low furnace that smells of brine and smoke. Welcome. Whenever you're ready to drift off, ease your shoulders, let your jaw unclench, and allow your breath to grow unhurried. Tonight, let us quietly explore for small worlds of patient work, a coastal glass bench where sand becomes bead and bottle, a desert library where pages learn their stitches, a tea workshop that presses leaves into traveling bricks, and a starried canoe moving through warm night, guided by memory and horizon. The pace will stay slow and descriptive, simple words, soft sounds, nothing sudden, only careful hands, ordinary tools, and the steady comfort of routine. We will notice textures and temperatures, damp wood that hisses, linen that creases, starch that dries to a friendly shine, rope that remembers its knots. You can listen or simply rest. Both are welcome. As you settle in for the night, we'll begin where heat meets shoreline, and a clear thread of breath turns to glass. If your mind is ready, we'll step to a low bench, the turning pipe, and the glow that waits for the day. The beach is still more night than day when the furnace coughs once, and then learns to breathe. Its mouth is a simple arch of clay and crushed shell patched in places with a paste that remembers yesterday's heat. The man tending it works with the steady movements of someone who trusts a sequence. Add charcoal, tap the bellows twice, listen. Add a small shovel of ash to temper the flame, listen again. Heat answers with a layered sound deep in the chamber, a hush like wind in a jar. Near the lip, a soft hiss where air meets brightness. On a stand beside the mouth, a metal blowpipe rests in a cradle of notched wood. The pipe is not much to look at, tired and darkened by work. The end bright where it meets glass, but it is the line between breath and vessel tonight. He rolls it under his palm to feel whether it still turns true. A fingertip slides along the shaft, feeling for burrs, none. The wood cradle is dampened so the hot iron will not teach it a lesson too quickly. Baskets wait on a reed mat. One brims with pale sand more cream than white. Another holds natron crystals that look like tired ice. A third keeps colored broken glass from yesterday, sorted by color and size. Reuse is not fashion, it is sense. Colored melts kinder than raw batch. A small dish of copper filings gleams like green ideas in the half-light, ready to coax sea blue into the melt if someone asks. The apprentice arrives without speech, feet making a polite sound on tamped earth. He sets down a leather bucket of water and two wooden blocks that have been soaking since moonrise. The blocks are dish-shaped, carved from fruit wood, their insides dark with years of hissing. He lifts one, and droplets fall back into the bucket in a thin necklace. He places them on the bench, one large for early shaping, one small for later coaxing. A strip of damp cloth lies folded like a quiet thought. Wind nudges the awning-woven reed, tied with fiber rope, and brings the smell of the sea into the workshop. The shore speaks in shushes. Shells rattle once in a low tray where they will later test the roundness of bottles. A flat stone, the marver, holds the cool of night like a promise. Its surface is already sprinkled with a pinch of ash so glass will not cling too eagerly. Now the first gather. The glassmaker leans forward and turns his wrist, letting the blowpipe's bright end enter the furnace mouth. He counts by breath, not by numbers, feeling weight arrive at the pipe's tip as a slow answer. When he withdraws it, The gather glows the color of sunrise caught in honey. The pipe rolls between his palm and thigh, a practical cradle keeping the blob centered. He dips the round into the large wet block. Steam lifts with a friendly sigh. The wood teaches the glass a curve, one steady circle at a time. He rests the gather on the marver. The stone wakes with a faint grit sound, as the surface lightly kisses heat. He rolls forward, back, quarter turn, back again, smoothing one side, then the other. Edges learn to be edges, an oval remembers it might become a cylinder. He lifts, breathes into the pipe. The bubble answers with a soft, living push glass stretching evenly because the pipe is turning evenly. In the thin quiet of dawn, breath and turning are a kind of duet. The apprentice, careful not to crowd, prepares bead rods and clay-coated reeds on a rack by warming them near the furnace mouth. If they are cold, the wound glass will crack. If they are too hot, the coating will blister. He tests with a touch that does not quite touch, the way people do when judging heat from a hearth. He sets a shallow dish of powdered glass within reach, colors separated into modest hills. Sea green frit glints, a smoky purple looks almost shy, plain clear waits like water. On a low table, a sheet of scraped papyrus lists today's requests in a scribe's hand, 3 small flasks with narrow necks for oil, a pair of cups that stand firm on a boat deck. A dozen beads for a trader who prefers blue and will accept green, 1 storage jar ringed for cord. The list does not hurry anyone. It simply names the day. Another gather. The glassmaker returns the piece to the furnace, warms it back to softness, and adds a careful color of fresh melt to the shoulder. The ring glows a step brighter. He marvels again to seat it. With a small iron blade, its handle wrapped in linen, he nicks a line where the piece will later break from the pipe. The iron's edge meets hot glass with a sound halfway between a whisper and a kiss. Along the bench, a paddle of olive wood sits in a bowl. He uses it to flatten a side for a bottle base. The paddle's surface is slick with a film of soot and water. It allows the glass to accept the gesture without sticking. The base dones slightly and then agrees to be flat. A wet cloth of folded pad briefly hugs the form to even a stubborn swell. Every tool is doing its small, precise kindness. A note for a quiet margin. If your mind enjoys such notes, natron, the pale mineral in the basket, helps glass melt at friendlier temperatures and keeps it from fogging as it cools. Sand is the body, ash and natron, or the teachers. Copper filings are the poet who suggests color without insisting. The apprentice takes up a bead rod, dips its tip into the furnace mouth just enough to make it welcoming, and turns it above a dish of molten glass. He touches, lifts, and winds a thin thread of melt around the rod, turning, the way a child might roll honey onto a stick. The bead grows from nothing to something in 7 turns. He rolls it on the marver to smooth the seam, then touches it to a pinch of colored frit so faint specks settle into the surface. Back to heat, a breath of flame, and the specks become part of the bead, no longer decoration but substance. He lays the rod on the rack to cool in slow agreement. A second bead follows, this one ringed with a darker thread laid like a simple path. Out by the light, shells wait in their tray, the roundest ones, chosen for their steady voices. Later, when a bottle is nearly done, it will stand upright on the tray and the shell layer will whisper whether the base is honest. A bottle that wobbles on shells will wobble on a ship. Now he opens the bottleneck. With steel tweezers he pulls the lip. and turns the pipe in the cradle at the same pace. The lip flares, then settles. A breath into the pipe, a pause, a quarter roll, a breath. These are not commands so much as conversations. He reaches for the pond till another iron rod with a tiny daub of molten glass on its end and touches that daub to the bottle's base. The moment the ponto bites, he taps the pipe near the score line. The neck drops its hold with a neat ping you can almost hear, even under the surf. The bottle has changed owners, from breath pipe to finishing rod. The apprentice brings the small wet block. The glassmaker spins the bottle on the pontil and smooths the opened mouth with the block's hollow. Steen rises in modest praise. He lifts the piece, checks the line of the rim against the horizon's line beyond the awning, and smiles because parallel lines agree today. A light roll along the marver settles the last question marks in the shape. He walks to the annealing pit, more trench than kiln, lined with warm sand that keeps heat from leaving in a hurry. He lays the bottle in gently so glass will not learn suddenness. Beside it rests yesterday's green cup, now asleep, and a ringed jar cooling under a blanket of ash and fiber. The pit looks like a bed for warm moons. Back at the bench the blowpipe waits, still warm, ready to carry the next breath from chest to vessel. The apprentice wipes the marver with a damp cloth, clearing it of tiny stones of cooled glass. Sunlight begins to find the reed awning, turning each binding knot into a small star. The air smells like driftwood and clean flame. In this room of sand and fire, of damp wood and stone, the tools teach the hands, and the hands thank the tools. When he lifts the pipe again, the day lifts with it, one gather, one turn, one careful breath at a time. The shore has taken on color now, though the sun still stands politely behind the dunes. Light arrives sideways, turning the furnace's clay-rimmed peach, and showing the faint handprints where repairs were patted smooth days ago. The blowpipe sits ready. The apprentice tilts the leather bucket, refreshing the wooden blocks until they drink no more. Steam rises in quick ribbons and vanishes like shy thoughts. A new gather swells at the pipe's tip, thicker this time, meant for a jar with shoulders enough to carry a cord. He rolls it along the marver. The stone gives back a sound like sand being folded with a shell. Forward, back, turn back. The form becomes obedient. He breathes through the pipe, steady but light, and the bubble grows without scolding its walls. A small nick near the shoulder marks where a handle will want to land later, only a suggestion, not an engraving. Copper filings wait in a little scoop. He warms the piece at the furnace mouth until it blushes brighter, then dips a wetted paddle into the scoop so the powder clings in a soft veil. With the paddle held above the turning glass, he shakes a breath of copper dust over the surface. The filings melt in an instant. The clear glow deepens, not to sea's deep blue but to a green that remembers water over sand. The apprentice smiles with his eyes. Color is a quiet joy people will pay for without asking too many questions. He trails a thin thread of fresh glass along the jar's shoulder, turning the pipe with his thigh so the thread lays like a calm road. Another thread follows below it, making a twin that will help cords settle later. The threads sit proud for a moment, then soften into place as the jar turns. He smooths them with a quick kiss from the small wet block. Steam gives its short applause. Handles now. He gathers a pea of hot glass on the tip of a small iron rod, touches it to the jar's shoulder where their earlier nick waits, and pulls out a ribbon while turning the jar toward him. The glass stretches like honey that understands discipline. Tweezers coax the ribbon downward, and in a second touch fixes the foot of the handle just above the belly of the jar. A wet paddle rounds the arch. Pressure is firm but kind. The handle becomes itself in 3 movements: touch, pull, settle. He repeats the dance for the other side, watching the jar's profile in the corner of his eye to keep balance honest. When 2 handles agree, the whole vessel relaxes. The apprentice, meanwhile, tends beads with a patient wrist. He warms a clay-coated reed and trails a coil of glass around it, then rolls the bead on a dusting of opaque frit the color of smashed shells. He presses the bead gently against a comb tool to raise tiny ridges, then rewarms it so the ridges soften into a faint ripple. Small work teaches breath to be tidy. The day's list leans against a bundle of reeds, slightly curled at the corner. He runs his thumb beneath the lines, 3 all flasks, 2 boat cups, a dozen beads mixed but leaning blue, 1 ring storage jar, for small stirs, simple rods with flattened ends. He adds a mark for the jar now in hand. The tally becomes a familiar pattern. Quiet arithmetic lives in the distance between fuel on hand and orders cooling in the pit, between today's heat and tomorrow's delivery. Fuel is counted as carefully as jars. Charcoal stands in baskets with their rims wrapped in palm fiber so they won't chew themselves apart when carried. He notes with an inked reed on a shell shard, basket 3/2, basket 4 full. The apprentice reads over his shoulder, not to check, only to learn how numbers sit when they wear marks instead of voices. A fisherman steps under the awning with salt still bright along his forearms and a length of net over one shoulder. He places a tiny terracotta lamp on the bench, its lip chipped, and asks for a replacement before the next dark moon. 2, he adds, as if the number had just introduced itself. The glassmaker taps the lip with his fingernail. The lamp answers with a small, honest note. Clay and glass are cousins. Both appreciate being asked what they can bear. Tomorrow, the glassmaker says. The fisherman nods and leaves a token, a shell bored cleanly for cord. Payment is later, courtesy is now. Back at the bench, the jar's lip waits. He reheats, adds a collar of clear glass, then opens the mouth with the tweezers, turning the pontil so the circle becomes round not by accident but by conversation. He flares the rim slightly with the small wet block, then settles it flatter. Boats prefer lips that behave under motion. A gentle marvering makes the edge true. He holds the jar against the morning line again. Agreement remains. The apprentice brings the shell tray. He sets it on the bench. The shells whisper restlessly as they settle. The glassmaker offers the jar down onto them, still on the pontil. The shells speak a soft, even hiss. No wobble. He tilts the piece, just a breath. The tray offers a small rattle, and then calms. Round enough to satisfy a deck. He taps the pontil with a wetted rod. A clean break answers. A tiny scar remains on the base. Where the finishing rod once held the piece, he takes a quick, almost absent-minded kiss with a heat-polished pebble to soften the mark. Not to erase it, tools should speak, but to make it gentle to the hand. The annealing pit receives the jar among its warm dunes. The heat there is a patient teacher. Glass that cools too quickly remembers how to shiver later, and that is not the kind of memory customers like. The pit's sand is turned now and then by a wooden spoon, so warmth does not play favorites. The apprentice has a question he will ask as a statement to keep the air soft, Blue-green likes copper, he says. It does, the glassmaker answers. And sometimes iron, when the sand insists. He runs a thumb along the marver's surface, feeling for grit, then wipes it with a damp cloth that smells faintly of river. Clear asks for patience, and clean. Tools. A pause opens that fits another task. He gathers a small, clear bubble meant to become a boat cup-wide, steady glow. He rolls it to a shallow dish, presses with the olive wood paddle, then spins it on the pontil, letting the lip widen into a con dish. A touch from the small wet block fixes a place for the thumb. Boatman like a resting point. He holds the cup at eye height, the edge sits as level as a well-kept garden wall. To the pit it goes, nested in sand like an egg in straw. Fuel arithmetic returns. He eyes the baskets, weighs them with the hand scale that lives in every craft. 2 baskets and a half carry the morning. Afternoon will ask for 1 more if the order grows. He scratches another note on the shell shard. Wine from West draw good, charcoal fine, add cullet to last melt. Cullet keeps the fire honest when fuel grows frugal. The apprentice tests the bead rack. The first ones have lost their shine from heat and taken on the calmer surface. That means their cores are no longer stubborn. He removes them by twisting the clay sleeve with a practiced roll, then slides the beads onto a cord threaded with straw spacers so they will not core while cooling. He sets them where shade can watch them. Another small vessel grows an oil flask with a long neck meant for measured pours. He trails a hair-thin thread around the neck near the lip to make a grip for the fingertip. The tiny ring glows, then quiets, now part of the piece the way a crease belongs to fabric. He marks the order list with a dot that means done but cooling, a mark used in every shop but invented anew each morning. Shells rattle once more as he tests the flask's base. True again. He reviews the bench with a broad glance that counts without reciting. Pipes too hot. 1 resting block sweat enough. Paddles clean. Tweezers ready. Cullet plenty. Natron sufficient. Copper half. Water add soon. The mind keeps ledgers the hands trust. A breeze from the sea drifts through, lifting the awning just enough to show a slice of brightening water. The furnace hums in its chest voice. Work goes on as water does. As breath does without hurry, without argument, with the quiet arithmetic of fuel, heat, and cooling time holding everything together. The furnace settles into its middle voice, a steady hum that lets hands think slower thoughts. Light has found the awning fully now. Reed shadows cross the bench like calm waves. The apprentice turns the water bucket so the blocks sip again. The larger block gives a low sigh, the smaller answers, and both return to their places like well-taught animals. A cup waits for its lip to be made honest. He reheats the rim until it shows the soft brightness that means bendable rather than melting, then touches the small wet block around the edge in one smooth circle. The surface evens, a tiny line vanishes, and the lip becomes hospitable to a mouth. He flattens a whisper of glass against the base with an olive wood paddle, then raises the cup to eye level and turns it slowly. The horizon beyond offers its quiet straightness, the rim agrees. A different finish is needed for the next small bowstring cut feet for a little lift. He gathers a pea of clear glass on a thin rod, touches it to the center of the base, and pulls away while turning, laying a thread that spirals inward like a snail's first idea. When the thread meets itself, he stops, smooths the coil with a damp paddle, and the foot stands settle, steady, not boastful. Bowls that stand a finger's width above a damp table live longer. The apprentice brings a narrow vial blank, still on its pontil, lip unformed, walls thin and willing. A pilgrim had asked last week for something he could hang from a cord, filled with scented oil to press inside a wrist before greeting a shrine. The glassmaker pinches two small nubs opposite each other near the shoulder with tweezers, pulls them into loops, and wets his fingers in the bucket to cool their tips so they keep their small arches. He trails a fine thread of glass in a simple pattern crossing bands that meet in tiny commas as the vial spins. The decoration is not a shout. It is a hand on a shoulder saying, "Go well." He opens the lip just enough for a measured pour and rounds it with the small block. The apprentice smiles with his eyes again. The little loops will please the pilgrim's cord. He turns the annealing sand with a wooden spoon, lifting a warm layer to the top so new pieces can rest without envy. The trench holds its flock, yesterday's green cup now fully asleep, the boat dish cooling under ash, the two-handled jar learning patience. The sand, when stirred, sounds faintly like dry grain poured into a clay jar. A short visit from the quarter above the shore. A woman whose hair smells of bread asks for two clear bottles to catch morning water for a household altar. She places a cloth-wrapped fig on the benches, thanks for saying yes before coins arrive. He nods and sets a reed crate nearer, where finished work will gather like cousins before a journey. The next gather is small and quick, just enough for a stopper. He forms a plug on the end of a thin rod, taps it flat with a damp paddle, and presses a tiny ring into the top using the point of a bone pick. A cord will pass through the ring so the stopper cannot wander. He cools it to a polite temperature on the marver and sets it aside on a leaf. Stoppers, like children, behave better when given somewhere soft to sit. Now blue-green jar asks for a rim fold. He warms the lip to that specific willingness and lifts it with tweezers while turning the pontil, folding the edge back over itself to make a rounded thickness that resists sipping. The move takes 3 breaths: lift, fold, smooth, and ends with a kiss from the small wet block. A folded lip remembers kindness. Shall speak again. The apprentice shakes the tray gently to spread them flat. The jar sits down, the shells whisper even. He turns the jar a hair. The whisper does not change. Round enough for a traveling basket. He breaks the pontil with a wetted touch and softens the scar with a warm pebble, nothing more. A brief accounting scene unfolds in gestures. The glassmaker glances at charcoal baskets, at the cullet bowl, at the natron jar. He scrapes a faint tally on the shell-shard ledger. 1.5 baskets gone, cullet plentiful, natron to be asked of the merchant when the moon is 3 nights older. He taps the shard with the reed as if to wake the numbers and make them stand up. The apprentice threads straw between finished beads strung earlier, spacing them so color does not bruise against color. He winds the cord on a short stick and ties it with a slip knot that can be topped to children later. Small orders like beads keep days honest between larger shapes. Lunch is not yet on the air, but the fig is cut with a copper knife and shared. Sweetness arrives, then leaves without ceremony. Hands return to the bench as if guided by a soft cord. 2 boat cups come next, a matched pair. He gathers, breathes, flares, and presses the base against the marver in a single turn so both cups carry the same weight in the hand. With the tweezers he adds a tiny dimple under each lip, the thumb register sailors like when the deck is inclined to opinions. The pair visit the shells agree. They go to sand side by side, like 2 calm coins. Packing begins even as making continues. The reed crate receives a cushion of shredded palm fiber. The apprentice lays the first cold pieces yesterday's on their sides with straw between each, the same way fish sellers bed their silver catch. A clay tag with a cut mark identifies the order. He tucks a slip of papyrus beneath the corner with the scribe's name, so the messenger will know where responsibility lives if a question wakes later. A trader arrives with a folded net bag and feet powdered by the key. He asks with a look about the ring jar. The glassmaker gestures toward the annealing trench. "Later, son," he says. The trader nods and ties a knot in his own cord his memory ledger and lays 2 bits of dull bronze on the bench as a partial. The coins are not handsome, but they are honest. The apprentice slides them into a shallow bowl with other coins, and a pierced shell. Metal and shell speak differently when they touch. One more detail for the pilgrim's vial. A narrow string is cut, heated, and fused at 2 points to form a band the cord can sit behind, so the vessel will not leap away if hands become busy. The band becomes part of the wall with a brief return to the furnace mouth. He rotates the vial slowly, watching the heat line crawl and fade. The wall thickens where it should, not everywhere. Light passing through shows evenness like water seen through still air. A small run of stirrers now straight glass rods with flattened tips. He dips and pulls, drawing threads that cool into line, then presses each in with the wet block to make a paddle that will stir oil or pigment. Simple pieces tilt a day toward completion in ways fine work can't. He lines them on the marver, parallel as tallies. The shore announces noon by smell before sound, tar warming on boat scenes, fish braziers waking, crushed reeds giving their green note where feet have pressed. The furnace keeps its conversation with the bellows. He adds a bowl of cullet to the next melt so the bath stays cooperative while charcoal thins. Reuse is frugality dressed as wisdom. He checks the trench-warm sand, soft heat, glass dozing. The 2-handled jar will sleep longer. The boat cups will be ready after shade lengthens. He smooths the sand over their shoulders with the spoon, the way one might cover a child to ensure the nap holes. The crate lifts a little when he tries its weight. He shakes it gently, nothing knocks. He adds a plug of straw at each corner and ties a lid of reed over the top with palm fiber twine. A small clay seal, pressed with the shop's mark, a wavy line above a dot, fastens the tie. The mark is not pride, it is a return address. A gull's shadow crosses the bench. The trader returns with a child who will carry the lighter crate. Payment will settle at the quaymaster's table where lists greet lists. For now trusted is the rope that binds soft bundles. The glassmaker hands the crate across with both palms. The trader inclines his head, the child mirrors it, serious in the way of children who sense responsibility. Footsteps fade toward water. Heat, sand, reed, breath, the 4 partners keep their quiet pact. He wipes the marver, turns the blowpipe in its cradle once, and glances at the shell-shard ledger. Afternoon will have its own shapes, its own arithmetic. For now the bench has earned a swallow of water, and the furnace a polite nudge of charcoal. Afternoon leans warm across the awning, and the workshop answers by moving a finger slower. The furnace keeps its middle voice, patient and round. The apprentice turns the bucket so the soaked blocks sip again and sets a fresh cloth along the bench, folded twice, corners squared. A gull works out a problem with wind above the shore, and then decides against it. The sea chooses a lower conversation. On the marver waits a cup with a lip that forgot itself, an edge nicked by an eager shove for a hasty hand this morning. It is a small wound, the kind that can widen into a complaint if ignored. He warms the wren slowly at the furnace mouth until brightness returns, not a shout. Only a clear hum. A flame polish is enough. He holds the lip just before the throat of heat and turns, turning the flaw through a gentle fire. Glass softens and remembers smoothness. He sets the cup on the marver and circles it once with the small wet block. The edge breathes, then settles. A fingertip tests. The rim agrees to be a rim again. A shadow walks in that the workshop already knows the fisherman from morning with salt dry now on his sleeves. He lays the chipped clay lamp beside the fig stem left earlier and adds another twin in shape and more patient. His net smells faintly of sun and tar. 2, he repeats, as the morning promised. The glassmaker nods and sets the blowpipe to the furnace mouth. Lamp glass wants a modest gather, a small belly to hold oil, a neck for a wick's temper, a lip that protects without hiding flame. He rolls the gather on the marver to teach it round, then breathes a bubble not much larger than a plum. A pinch from tweezers draws out a small spout like a bird's beak, then a slight flare at the lip so wick ash will not blacken the neck too eagerly. He rests the belly in the large soaked block. Steam makes its warm punctuation. A flat press to the base with the olive wood paddle gives the lamp steady feet. He adds a collar of clear on the spout's base, a quiet ring to strengthen what will see heat every night. On the base, he trails a tiny raised dot, a place the fisherman's thumb can find to set direction in the dark. The apprentice prepares a second lamp by warming a blank gather the size of a small apple. He breathes lightly, eyes narrow in attention, but not in strain. With tweezers he lifts a little lip, a small mouth for the wick. He asks the spout a question by pulling a hair longer than needed. The glass answers by thinning politely. The master rescues the line with a wet cloth's edge, smoothing spout to belly until the curve reads as one sentence. The apprentice smiles, chagrined and pleased in the same breath. Wick tells us how long, the master murmurs. Glass will always allow more. Both lamps receive a slow, even warm at the furnace mouth, a tempering of attitude, then travel to the annealing sand. He hollows a nest with the wooden spoon and lowers each in, one slightly higher so he can tell twins apart. Sand settles like a blanket. Moon's first watch, he says to the fisherman, kneading when they will be safe to carry. The man taps the bench with 2 fingers in thanks, leaving behind a neat pair of small fish wrapped in clean reed salt work, paying firework. Balance like such exchanges. A trader's voice arrives at the edge of the awning, holding a jar of natron crystals that clink gently like cool beads. She pours a pinch into her palm to show grain and color. The glassmaker examines the crystals, no damp, no clumping, edges still crisp. He tilts a little onto a clay dish, touches tongue to finger, tastes the dry mineral in the way craft learns to talk with materials. Good, he says. They barter by handfuls and promise, setting a small pile of cullet and to beads corded in blue beside her jar. She laughs softly. Beads make natron friendlier and ties a slender knot in the cord around her wrist to remember the rest out when the ringed jar leaves the sand. Trade moves like a tide, out with a nod, back with a nod. Wine makes an argument under the awning without asking. It snatches a corner, lifts it just high enough to complain, and flutters straw spacers from the bead tray. The apprentice puts one hand on the awning post and the other on the re-edge, bringing it down with care so reeds do not crack. The master lays a flat stone on the troublesome corner and shifts the twine tied to finger widths along the pole where bark grips better. The flustered straw is gathered and rehoused. No scolding. A small squaw gets a small answer. The furnace enjoys a polite feed of charcoal. He reads the draw through the moth glow the way sailors read wind by canvas. Brighter on one side means the bellows want a courteous tap. He obliges. Flame centers. He adds a dish of cullet to keep the bath cooperative. Recycled glass is like elder craftspersons already knowing how to behave, keeping the young batch in line. On the list, a ringed storage jar remains to be finished. He rehearses its journey in his head before lifting the pipe shoulders with twin cords, a folded rim, a base with a low dome. Nothing proud. He gathers a larger weight, breathes with patient lungs, and rolls again and again until the body says jar without confusion. The ring trails go on as steady roads. A wet paddle persuades them to settle. Handles land where marks predict. Their arches match as if agreed beforehand. He opens the lip, folds it back for strength, and rounds it with the small block, steam tracing a soft halo. Shells test the base. They purr evenly. The trench accepts the jar into its warm library of temporary dozing. Now the closing ritual begins in small rehearsals that lead toward evening. He wipes the marver with the damp cloth, long pauses that lift grit and heat ghosts. He turns each tool in its place so iron handles face one way. Wooden ones another, a language the hand will read without looking when tomorrow's like returns. The apprentice empties the coin bowl onto cloth and counts by touch first, by sight second, stacking bronze bits into short towers. Shells in a small curve. He records the day with a reed on a slice of potsherd. Orders in sand, orders departed, fuel remaining, dead owed and owed, two simple marks, each a promise. The lamps announce readiness by refusing to feel warm through the sand. He lifts them like sleeping birds, palms under bellies, thumbs on feet. The fisherman receives them with both hands and sets them side by side on a folded cloth in his net. Spouts face east. He notes a superstition or a convenience. Either is compatible with a flame. He leaves to more shells drilled for cord and a smile that contains tomorrow. For a last ease of the day, the master gives the furnace a drink for nitesh drawn thin across the mouth to teach heat to lower without sulking. He banks charcoal to one side, piles a quiet wall of spent embers next to the pot where the melt rests, then touches the bellows once, twice, a third time to say good night in the language of air. The apprentice coils the bead cord and slips it into a reed tube. Straw spacers rustle like dry rain. He props blowpipes in the cradle with the bright ends angled away from stray elbows, then lays the soaked blocks on their edges to dry a little wet enough to be ready, not so wet they forget shape. He drapes a damp cloth over the marver, not to hide it, but to tell dust the stone is under care. Outside, the shore has turned nearly amber. A skiff pushes off with 3 easy strokes. Nets on poles lean like tired flags. The workshop breathes a last shared breath with the sea. He looks once more into the annealing sand and smooths it with the spoon so each piece feels covered. Glass sleeps better when it believes itself remembered. He sets the shell-shard ledger under a smooth stone, kisses to fingers against the furnace wall as a habit more muscle than belief, and steps back from heat into the day's soft edge. Tomorrow will ask for other shapes. Tonight asks that tools be given their rightful rest. Evening straightens the shadows under the awning. Heat in the furnace lowers to a comfortable, all-ember pulse, the kind that asks for tidiness rather than naking. Sand in the annealing trench radiates a slow kindness. The air above it shimmers only a little. The apprentice lifts the wooden spoon and turns the top layer once more, not for heat's sake now, but for the feeling that every shoulder has been tucked. He tests the first piece with the back of his fingers, yesterday's green cup that slept the longest. Warm, yes, hot, no. He slides fingers under and lifts, keeping the cup level so its rest is not startled into a memory of strain. The glass says nothing, which is the right conversation now. He sets the cup on the marver's covered edge, cloth underin. A second cup follows, then the boat dish with its slight thumb register near the lip. Each new surface catches the day's last light and returns it polite. The two-handled jar has cooled enough to be moved, though its warmth still speaks. The master takes that one, palms open under the belly, thumbs light on the handles. Handles are confident, but they prefer not to be told so. He tilts it a degree, just to feel balance, then settles it next to the cups. He touches the folded rim with the side of his little finger. The fold is smooth and true. A faint smile makes a small home in his cheek, and then leaves again. At the bench, the reed crate waits with its bed of shade palm fiber. The apprentice lays a layer of straw, then fits the cups on their sides, lips nested so that a breath of space remains where it should. Straw threads between glass, a patient buffer. The boat dish slides into its own envelope of straw, placed flat with a whisper of room for air. The jar gets its corner, upright, a collar of palm fiber gathered around its waist so the cord rings do not rub against reed. Footsteps approach, and the scribe from the quay stands in the awning's light. He carries a narrow board and a short brush, a pot of satin gum hanging in a leather loop like a small thought. He greets with his chin. The master answers with the shell-shard ledger. The scribe reads the scratch marks, nodding in that quiet rhythm of people who spend their days guiding soft signs into sharp ones. He writes on papyrus, 1 ring jar, 2 boat cups, 1 dish, 2 lamps already fetched, beads as counted stirrers, and the oil flask with the pilgrim's loops. He adds a symbol for cooled and boxed, another for cooled but unboxed, small ticks that make sense to those who were present and are polite enough to puzzle others. The fisherman returns slower now because evening has chosen to be careful. He carries a folded net with a soft clink inside where the lamps ride. Light faces east, he says again without looking, and shoos the thumb dot on each base as if the glass had instructed him. The master nods. May your wick learn patience, the scribe says, half formula, half wish. The fisherman leaves a curve of shells drilled for cord payment, promise, and the idea of tomorrow all braided together and vanishes toward the smell of salt and tar. The apprentice ties the crate in a cross, 2 cords under, 2 over, not centered, ends tucked back under the cross like a tidy thought. He presses a clay seal at the tie-wavy line above a dot, the workshop's mark. The scribe darkens the seal with a thumb smudged in ash so the impression is visible in dim storerooms. The shorter bundle carries the bead cords wrapped around a reed. Straw protects their colors from elbow arguments. Into a small basket go the stirs and the pilgrim's vial, each wrapped in twist of soft reed husk. The vial's little loops peep like ears. A breeze presses lightly through the awning, cooler than at noon. The sea tests 3 small waves and stores away the answers. From a courtyard up the lane, a pot lid speaks one brief chime against clay, "Someone will eat soon." The apprentice lifts the jar and leans it once more against shells to listen. The shells admit a small, even hiss and then silence. Round enough? He pats the base with a cloth, more affection than polish. Natron crystals change hands with the traders, return her jar now lighter by 1/3, his dish heavier with pale grains. She places 2 thin beads of indigo cord into his palm. She has looped them with a knotted quirk that means "Remember me kindly." He adds her name's first curve to the potsherd ledger. "When the moon grows rounder," he says, meaning when both will meet again by the key master's lamp for full reckoning. She tilts her head. "When your sand sleeps and your fire wakes," she replies, the joke between people whose trades wear clocks on different wrists. The apprentice swishes the water bucket along the marver's cloth, wrings the cloth hard, and lays it flat to dry. He props the soaked blocks on their edges with handles toward the wall so tomorrow's hands will find them already speaking. The blowpipes go last, propped in their cradle with bright ends turned outward so rust cannot travel down to the breath end, while the night holds damp thoughts. He rubs a drop of oil on a tweezer's hinge and opens, closes, until sound changes from scrape to whisper. The scribe, finished with marks and names, lights a small wick from the last respectable flame of the furnace and watches it catch. "The key will like your seal," he says, meaning the inspector won't weigh objects with his eyes more than necessary. He places the papyrus roll inside a little clay sleeve, plugs it with a bit of fiber, and tucks it into the crate's top weave. He draws a short line over his own nail with the remaining ink. It is his habit for remembering that a record is both mark and finger. Then he touches the post with 2 fingers and goes. A boy from the quay arrives to shoulder the lighter bundle and to steady the crate as the master and apprentice lift together. They walk it to the edge of the awning, set it down, lift again, short moves to let weight become less of a stranger. The boy hums a tune made of 2 notes and a gap. The crate seems to prefer that melody. They trade a breath. Then out to the lane they go, reed under palm, palm under reed, feet finding the shallow ruts that roll easier. The master returns to the bench for what the day still owes the place. He loosens ash over the furnace mouth until the last orange retreats into a domestic glow. He drips a ladle of water along the hearth edge, not on heat, but near, so clay will drink slowly and not crack when night's cool hand comes. He turns the annealing sand once more and covers it with a cloth woven of old reed, a house for warm moons. He sets the shell-shard ledger beneath a smooth river stone and slides 1 bead beside it for luck without religion. The apprentice fetches the broom and draws the day toward the door in long, unhurried strokes. Glass grit ticks, straw whispers, ash prints a race. He sets the broom upright in its own corner, the bristles like a little reed field turned toward sleep. The water bucket empties with a soft sound into the sand outside where no one will step until morning. The bench receives a final palm pressed flat. Thank you is a language Wood understands. He pauses under the awning and looks at the line where water and sky disagree. A small boat makes the quarrel friendlier, sliding on a path thin as a cord. Somewhere below decks tomorrow's cups will find their job, and somewhere in a quiet room an oil flask will attend a prayer without taking credit. Sand will remember heat, breath will remember pipes, tools will dream their neat places. He lowers the awning a hand's span and ties it, not closed, only modest. The shop will listen to the shore tonight and report in the morning. He lifts the reed tube of beads, the empty coin cloth, and the little clay seal stamp. The apprentice rolls the awning's edge into a neat core and secures it with two quick knots that have names only in their hands. They step into the umber lane, turn once to make sure the furnace's mouth glows like a bank thought, then walk toward the quay where the crate's voice joins others, the rub of reed, the clink of cord toggles, the low murmur of lists shaking hands. Night comes to stand on the threshold, not stern, simply ready. Glass sleeps. The shore remembers. Tomorrow we'll find the same bench, the same marver, a fresh bucket, and a line of light waiting for breath. And as the last glow from the furnace settles into quiet clay, we travel inland by the map of dust and starlight to a city of scholars, where linen thread and gum Arabic teach pages to become a single, breathing spine. Morning has not quite chosen a color yet. Dust lifts like flour along an alley where sandals have taught the ground to be smooth. The binder's doorway holds its own shade, cool, square, a small pause between street and room. Inside, the floor is tamped earth that remembers last season's rains. The air smells of leather and gum Arabic, of soot and a faint sweetness that lives in old parchment. He enters as he always does, palm to door frame, a soft nod to wood, then a breath that lets the shoulders settle. A woven mat lies along the long wall, its edges sit straight because he asks them to. Near the window, a low table keeps the light, polished cedar, burnished by years of elbows. On it rest a day's first tools, set in a simple line. A smooth river pebble for burnishing. A bone folder that looks like a pale leaf. And all with a handle rubbed satin by many mornings. 2 needles threaded with linen, the ends coiled into tidy commas. A small brass bowl holds gum Arabic dissolved overnight. When he tips it, the liquid turns slow like honey. Talk to be careful. From a shelf, he brings down the day's work wrapped in cloth, loose gatherings of parchment, and paper signatures that have been copied by a scribe in a courtyard 2 turns away. He unties the cord and lifts the first stack. The parchment is goat, thin and flexible. When he flexes a corner, it remembers to lie flat again. The paper is rag-based, a soft grayish green. It smells faintly of water and sun, like laundry on a line. He sorts the signatures by touch and by sight, the way bakers sort loaves without counting. A little notch cut at the bottom outer corner of each gathering helps him keep the order honest. He aligns for edges with a gentle tap on the cedar table. The text blocks settle into a square, like good neighbors finding their fences. Before stitching, there are holes to ask for. He lays a template across the fold of the first signature, a strip of parchment marked with 5 dots evenly spaced, the top and bottom a thumb from the edge. He places the stack of signatures in a sewing frame to upright posts and a crossbar, with 3 slender leather thongs stretched between. These thongs will become the book's secret ribs. He sets the first signature around them and opens to the center. The awl point meets the parchment at each dot with the sound of soft punctuation. Prick, lift, prick, lift. He does not push hard, he twists, letting the point do what points know. He works through the stack, pressing gently on the fold with the bone folder now and then to keep the crease agreeing. When the last signature has learned its 5 small stars, he breathes once through his nose and listens to the room, in case it wishes to tell him something he forgot. The room stays friendly and quiet. Thread comes next. Linen, waxed lightly so it knows not to fray. He pulls a length from the skein and draws it over a cake of beeswax, then warms the coated thread between thumb and forefinger to make the wax gentle. The thread takes on a faint smell of summer. He threads 2 needles, one at each end, a habit that lets him stitch from both sides without turning the book like a fish on a fire. He begins at the tail end, the bottom hole of the first signature, passes the needle out through the fold, round the first leather thong, and back in. The thread hugs the thong and says, "Stay with me." He goes to the second thong, repeats, then the third, then out through the top hole. A gentle pull seats the thread snug but not stern. The first signature now knows the frame. He adds the second signature on top and laces it in, linking the end of one thread to the other with a small kettle stitch at the head. The knot sits against the fold like a calm bird. He repeats at the tail. The rhythm grows, in around in, kettle at head, kettle at tail. The stack thickens, and the book begins to imagine itself. A note you can keep or let float by. Binders in this city prefer lacing onto thongs or cords rather than sewing through cloth tapes. Leather thongs accept paste and board later with a quiet handshake. They also feel nice under the fingers when the book's spine is dressed. As he stitches, he pauses sometimes to rub the linen thread between finger and thumb, feeling for a fray that might decide to be trouble. When he finds one, he smooths it with a breath of wax and continues. His left hand lives inside the fold, the right manages needle and pull. He keeps the tension even. Threads that pull too hard make a spine that complains. Threads too loose let pages wander. Outside the doorway a boy passes with a tray of cups, thin earthenware, rings softly against soft. Somewhere a hen remarks on a private matter. A neighbor sweeps dust toward an agreement with the alley. The binder's room keeps its own conversation, the shush of thread, the quick click of needle against all when tools greet by accident, the quiet exhale when a signature settles precisely. By the time the sun has chosen to name itself day, the last signature has joined the family. He ties off the thread with 2 small, flat knots that lie like sleeping beetles, and snips the ends short. He rocks the text block gently, spine down against the cedar to settle the kettle stitches, then lifts the whole sewn book from the frame. The thongs lie across the spine like bridges. He presses the book between palms and feels it breathe stiffer than a stack of leaves, now more pliant than wood, and in between that books understand. Now the spine needs glue. He lays a narrow strip of parchment under the text block and warms the gum Arabic by holding the brass bowl between hands. Gum has its own temper. Cold, it sulks. Warm, it cooperates. With a small brush he strokes adhesive along the spine, working it into the threads and folds and over the thongs, not drowning, only feeding. The smell rises plant sweet, a little like dates without sugar. He leaves the spine to think for a moment while he prepares the press. The press is to cedar boards and to wooden screws with winged handles. He sets the book between the boards with the spine protruding just beyond the edge, tightens the screws until the boards hold like a firm hand clasp. With a bone folder he fans the folds a hair so glue will knit signatures without gluing pages to their neighbors. A strip of linen super lies ready. He brushes more gum over the spine and lays the linen into it, tapping lightly with the folder to seat it. The linen will keep the back from opening too far and losing its dignity. He trims the thongs to a measured length to finger width so they can be laced into boards later. He snips their ends into little points that will travel through slots more politely. When the gum shine turns to a thoughtful satin, he loosens the press and lifts the book out. The spine looks like a calm hill with 3 gentle ridges where thongs rise. Covers necks, but not yet made. He sets the text block under a weight of smooth stone that used to live in a river and looks out the small window to count what the light is doing. On a shelf a stack of goat hide squares weights, dyed warm brown, rubbed with oil months ago. He chooses two that match in thickness and mood. He will pare edges later so folds will not grow clumsy. Before the room moves forward, there is the little business of edges. He aligns the text block between planks and taps the fore-edge with the side of the bone folder so pages sit flush, neither proud nor shy. Trimming will be tomorrow's work with a sharp knife, and no hurry. Today's task is spine and sewing, and both have been taught their lessons for now. He rinses the brush in a jar of clean water and wipes it with a cloth that used to be someone's sleeve. Tools lean back where they belong, handles aligned, points aware, but not working. He presses his palm to the cedar table once, a habit shaped like gratitude, then reaches for the smooth pebble and rolls it in his hand, feeling its weight, its cool surface. The pebble reminds him that burnishing is patient. He sets it down again. Outside, a thin line of shade along the alley shrinks by a grain. Inside, the book on the mat breathes an invisible inch deeper, becoming itself. Light has settled into the room like a visitor who intends to stay politely. The text block rests under its river stones, spine thinking, threads remembering where they lie. Today the work moves outward, boards and skin, hinges and paste enough to give the book a calm house. He clears the cedar table and lays a square of hide flat, a warm brown goat, grain side up, the scent mild and a little like rain on dust. With his thumb he searches the edges for thickness changes. The spine area will want strength. The turn-ins will want thinness so folds greet each other without a lump. He takes up the paring knife. Its blade low and wide, its edge kind but persuasive. On a small paring stone rubbed smooth with oil he touches the blade and tests it with a hair on his arm. The hair decides to leave. The knife is ready. He turns the hide grain down on a scrap board and begins to pare the perimeter. Long, shallow strokes, a breath between each, the knife held like a spoon that is not for eating. Ribbons of leather whisper away, curling into shy commas along the table's edge. He checks with his fingers more than with his eyes, pads reading thickness the way tongues read tenderness. Corners are given extra attention. Later they will fold like napkins, and should not pout. Boards necks. In this place, cedar serves, firm, light, willing. From a stack he chooses to planks and measures a hair greater than the text blocks, height and width, leaving a generous foredge for protection. He marks with a bone folder and a charcoal line, then cuts with a fine-tooth saw, letting the last fibers part slowly to avoid a ragged mood. The boards are planed at the fore-edge for a faint bevel, the kind that looks like respect for hands. Slots for thongs are laid out on the inner face of each board. He pricks to small marks opposite each thong's path, slightly angled to match the spine's future slope. With a narrow chisel, he opens each channel, shallow as a thumbnail, clean enough that leather will glide through without complaint. He rubs the channel with the bone folder to smooth roughness. Wood appreciates that courtesy. The text block comes out from under its stone. He checks that gum and linen have settled into a friendly firmness. He takes up a hammer, not for pounding but for coaxing a finishing hammer with the face polished to a shine. He rests the spine on a hollowed block and, beginning at the center, gives it light taps along the back, turning the book after each pass. This rounds the spine into a gentle shoulder where board edges will later sit. Each tap is the weight of a nod. The text block size into a more book-like curve. He threads the trimmed thong ends through the slots in the first board inside to outside, then back through the second slot. He pulls gently until the board meets the shoulder with no daylight peeking. The thong ends lie along the inner face like quiet snakes. He repeats on the other side, keeping the head and tail margins equal. A quick check when shoulders and board edges make friends. The book pretends to be whole even before skin. Paste joins the day now. He tips flour into a small pot, just enough for today's work, and a spoon of clean water. Over a gentle brazier he warms and stirs until it thickens to a slow ribbon. He adds a broth of gum to make the paste polite with leather, then takes it from heat to cool while he smooths the board edges with paper rubbed in ash to make them less sharp to leather's feelings. Head and tail will need a little grace. He cuts to narrow strips of leather, softer and lighter than the cover, for simple and bands. He wraps each around a silk or linen cord. Here a strip of reed paper twisted tight will do, and pastes it to the spine's top and bottom, just behind the first fold. Later, when the book meets hands, these and bands will take the first bumps. For now they look like small smiles. He tests the cooled paste with a finger. It should stand and then slump slowly. Good. With a brush he lays a thin coat along the outer face of the boards where leather will lie and on the spine between thongs. Paste is food, not drowning. The brush feeds wood and cloth enough to keep company, not enough to ask for rescue. He sets the book aside a moment and returns to the pared hide. Measuring is more about allowance than exactness now. He lays the book onto the leather, spine to the line where grain is calm, and marks a margin for turn-ins to fingerwidths at head and tail. A little more at the fore-edge because for edges enjoy generous shawl. He cuts the hide with a long, unhurried draw of the knife so edges do not learn serration. At the corners he marks a mitre each at a quiet angle so folds will meet like cousins at a festival, not like strangers who arrived at the same door. He brushes paste onto the flesh side of the leather, not too wet, not too thin, and waits a few breaths so the skin can consider its meal. When the surface changes from shine to respectful dullness, he lifts the book into place and draws the leather up over the spine, smoothing with the bone folder so it finds the shoulder and hugs it. He draws the leather across the boards, hand following hand, pushing air out in front, coaxing paste to be everywhere and nowhere. The grain darkens with contentment. Head and tail turns come next. He clips a tiny wedge from each corner where mitres meet, then folds the leather inward, guiding the fold with the bone folders rounded back so it does not make an opinionated ridge. At the head, he tucks a little pleat at each shoulder, neither bulky nor thin, exactly the kind of pleat that old books were like a secret. The tail repeats the lesson. The four edges fold last. Leather meeting leather, that the mitre corners aligned. Tips pressed lightly with the folder until they agree to lie down. He rubs the cover with the smooth river pebble in slow ovals, pressing, but not punishing. Burnishing wakes a low glow, as if the leather remembered a sunset. The sound is a hush, regular as breathing. He eases the leather over the thong puffs inside each board, and lifts the thong ends. They pass through small slits cut in the leather, then lie again along their channels. He pastes them down and taps once with the hammer's polished face so fibers learn patience. A scrap of parchment bridges over each laced area like a small bandage. Boards prefer not to feel bones. A pause earns its place. He opens and closes the book just a finger's width to feel the hinges. The leather creaks like a friendly door in a cool house. The shoulder line is even, the board squares sit equal at head, tail, and foredge. He slides the book between pressing board cedar again and tightens two cords around the stack to keep the shape while paste does its quiet knitting. There is still a small business with labels and lines. From a strip of dyed leather he cuts a little lozenge to live on the foredge. Some owners like a mark that tells which way to pull the book from a pile. He pastes it in place and smooths it with the pebble until it shines like a tiny moon. On a scrap of paper he tests a red dot with a brush good for section marks, but that will wait until the book greets ink again. He cleans the knife on a cloth dampened at the jar, dries it, and lays it with the edge turned toward himself, a rule he keeps so wandering hands will not learn a sharp lesson. The paste pot gets a lid of paper so a fly will not mistake it for a pond. The paring ribbons are swept into a palm basket. Later they can soften a hinge or polish a corner. Outside, voices gather in the alley, not loud, only braided. A seller of dates names his sweetness with a tone that does not beg. A donkey shakes its harness exactly once. The binder touches the spine through the press boards and feels warmth where work has been, not hot now, just living. On the windowsill a thin strip of light moves from left to right by the width of a thumb. Inside, leather rests under pebbles, memory, wood under paste, thread under linen. The book has a body. Words will meet it tomorrow. Edges wait like sleeves to long for a careful wrist. The press cords are loosened. The book comes out with a soft exhale as leather releases cedar. Paste has settled from shine to a gentleman's dullness. He tests a corner with a fingernail, no slide, no stick, ready for the next patience. Trimming begins with a measure made by hand. He lays the text block between two cutting planks, smooth cedar kissed with a thin edge of horn, where the knife will pass. He jogs the foredge by tapping the spine against the table, then taps the head and tail until pages sit flush, neither shy nor proud. He sets two wooden screws to grip the plank so the book's body is safe while its sleeve changes. The long knife, honed on oilstone till it gathers light, rests across his palm like a quietly dangerous reed. Foredge first. He bears the blade low, almost flat, and draws it in long, slow strokes away from himself, never forcing, only repeating the sentence until wood, paper, and steel agree. Each pass lifts a ribbon as narrow as a whisper. He does not hurry the last pass. It is the one pages remember. When the foredge wakes from its haircut, he smooths it with a folded scrap of rag paper rubbed with a breath of ash, enough tooth to persuade, not enough to scratch. The surface turns even, still humble. Head and tail come next. He squares the planks again and kisses the knife along the top edge. 1, 2, 3 passes to clean the air of fuzz and small pride. Tail the same. Gravity's friend gets equal courtesy. He rounds the foredge just a hair with the bone folder, pressing a half oval so thumb and forefinger will later find a soft grip without opening too wide. Books enjoy being opened where they prefer. He eases the book from the planks and lays it on a slip of parchment. A thin wash of diluted gum settles any lifted fibers along the cut, brushed lightly and left to forget themselves. While edges think, he warms a small brass stylus in a clay cup that sits near a sleeping coal. Heat for tooling needs to be shy, hot enough to print a memory into leather, not so bold as to scorch. Blind tooling today will be simple. A collar of quiet lines around each board and a small lozenge at the center to remember the label's place. He cuts a paper guide to right angles, the width of a finger from the board's edge, and lays it lightly on the leather. Through the guide he draws the stylus in one slow pass, then another, listening for the sound leather makes when its surface compresses, a dry murmur, like silk answering a compliment. He lifts the guide, slides it to the next side, and repeats. Corners meet neatly, no flourish, no flowers, just geometry with a soft voice. At the center he presses a small diamond frame, using for short strokes that meet with modesty. The shape does not climb off the surface, it sits close, as if painted by quiet weight. He sets the warm stylus aside on its charred saucer, and inhales the small sweetness of warm leather. Almost nothing, almost everything. A title slip will live here, but not in the language of loud gold. He writes a few characters on a narrow strip of polished paper with a reed, the book's shortening, the scribe's first mark. Ink sits glossy, then turns satin. He pastes the strip into the lozenge and rubs it gently with the smooth pebble until paper and leather learn one skin. The pebble's circles are slow, pressure even, the effect like sun laid across a floor. Edges dry, time to color them a shade more hospitable to hands. Not gaudy, only a light burnish. He dampens a pad of linen, rubs it on a slip of powdered soot cut with a tiny breath of gum, and strokes along the foredge in even passes, from head to tail. The soot knits with the cut fibers, making a tone that disguises dust and thumb's travel. He burnishes the edge with the pebble until it forgets it was ever 300 small mouths and learns to be a single quiet lip. Now the first opening, which is not a reading but a teaching. He lays the book on cedar, spine toward him, boards lying flat. With the bone folder wrapped in a thin cloth, he lifts the first board and opens it a finger's breadth, runs the folder along the hinge to persuade leather and linen to be friends. He closes it, turns the book, opens the other side the same, then increases the breadth to 2 fingers, then 3, moving down a few leaves at a time. Gathering stretch, then agree. No crack, no protest, only a mild creak, the way a door in a cool house answers when it is touched kindly. He selects a sprig of thread and makes 2 thin markers by knotting silk to small slips of parchment. He pastes a breath of gum under each and tucks them at head and tail of the spine, not as permanent bookmarks but as friendly ears to catch a finger later. Some owners like ribbon. This owner will accept modest tongues. Inside the first leaf, the scribe has left a blank space where the binder may place a small stamp or note. He draws a tiny wave and the same mark the glass worker presses into clay in another world, perhaps a coincidence of trades, perhaps the sign this city uses when it wishes to say made well. Not loud. He touches the mark with the pebble so the ink sets into the paper's tooth. A neighbor leans across the doorway with a covered bowl, starch paste just made for a tailor next door. She asked for a pinch of gum in trade, hers soured in the heat. He dips a spoon into his brass bowl and passes it. She sets the covered bowl on the table for him alone of coolness and admiringly taps the board line he just tooled. It looks like the edge of a quiet pool, she says. and leaves without waiting for the compliment's echo. He smiles and breathes in the faint rice-sweet steam that lifts from the bowl before returning it to its errand. He lifts the book in both hands and feels its balance. Boards pull evenly. The spine holds its new curve without stiffness. He opens to the middle. The text lies flat enough to invite a palm, not so flat as to forget modesty. He rubs the foredge once with a cloth, a last smoothing. Decor wants one more whisper. He warms the stylus again and presses 3 tiny dots at each board corner inside the frame, an old habit some binders call star grains. They catch light the way a sandbank catches eyelids. He lets the board cool and runs a fingertip over the dots. The leather's grain rises slightly around each imprint, pleased to have been asked. He returns the book between pressing boards, no great pressure now, only enough to remind shape while the last damp hides within dries itself to memory. A small stone weights the stack. Stones are good at steadying ideas. Tools begin to stand up straight in their places. The knife is wiped and laid with its edge toward him. The stylus cools on its shard. The bone folder rests parallel to the table's long side, the awl at a neat angle like a drawn breath. Threads coil into their little commas again. The brass bowl of gum receives a paper lid, set crooked so air can speak with it, not too much. Outside, the alley has chosen afternoon. A boy treads carefully with a tray of glasses. A camel answers a command only once, which is the mark of respect between camel and handler. Dust settles, rises, settles. Inside, the room smells of leather warmed and gum dried, of cedars calm. He rests his palm on the upper board and feels the book's heart going from what to simply awake. Words have a house now. Tomorrow the house will get a threshold and a door latch. The room has the color of late honey. Leather's surface has settled from work to rest. Paste has become memory. He loosens the cords and lifts the book from between the boards. It lies in his hands with the soft dignity of something that chooses to be useful. A line in red will live on the foredge. Not a title, only a whisper the owner requested, a brief name that will wink from a stack. He sets a narrow guard of card against the boards to protect leather, then clamps the book between cutting planks so only the foredge shows. From a small show cup he mixes red vermilion tempered with a drop of gum and a breath of water. The brush is fine, trimmed from a reed and a pinch of goat hair. He writes slowly, letters small and square, letting the cut fibers drink the color without bleeding. Stroke, brief stroke. When the last curve settles, he tips the edge toward the light. The red sits calm, neither bright nor shy. He dries it with a fan of woven palm held just far enough away to be a breeze, not a scold. Class thongs next this book will travel, and pages like to meet again where they parted. He chooses to narrow strips of soft leather for ties, burnishes their tips so they find holes politely. On the foredge of the upper board he marks 2 small slits and opens them with the awl. On the lower board, 2 loops of braided cord anchor under the leather, forming gentle catches. He threads the thongs through the top slits from inside to out, pastes their tongues, and hammers them once with the polished face so they learn to stay. He tests. The ties meet the loops with a small, satisfied click. When untied, they lie flat and forget their pride, but the owner prefers also a wrap band for dust. He cuts a longer strip of leather, a hand's width, long enough to circle the book once and tuck. He pastes its inner face lightly and lays a strip of linen down the center so the band will not stretch out of respect. At one end he stitches a tiny toggle of horn, at the other he pierces a slit with the awl. The band will live loose, kept with the book, ready for wind. A slipcase will keep sun and fingers from making friends too quickly. He measures pasteboard to cheeks, a spine, a four-edged lip. The board he uses is layers of paper married with paste-a-com, forgiving material. He cuts with the long knife, squares with the bone folders back, joints are scored, not cut, and folded over a broad dole so creases are arcs, not cracks. Inside faces receive paste the flour kind mixed earlier. Now warm as bread does when you lift a cloth. He lines the interior with rag paper, cream like morning milk. He rubs the paper down with the pebble until it glows a little. Outside, he dresses the case in brown paper, burnishes corners, clips neat miters, and presses the whole in a light frame so it dries square. A thumb notch at the foredge will allow gentleness in removing the book. While case and band consider their futures, he turns to small finishings. The spine's linen super and end bands receive a second, thin coat of gum brushed in strokes that travel from head to tail so hairs of cloth learn the path of opening. He warms the brass stylus to the level of a kind teacup and adds to blind lines across the spine, one above, one below the center thumb so fingers will know where to settle when lifting. The lines are not decoration for strangers, they are instructions for friends. Visitors collect in the alley like notes at the bottom of a page. A boy brings a palm basket with dates. He trades 3 for a strip of leather to mend a drum's edge. A woman with a square of indigo cloth asks if the binder has a pinch of soot for drawing a border. He gives her the slip from edge burnishing and, in return, she leaves a thread of blue that looks like evening. The slipcase dries enough to stand. He tries the book, slides it in spine first, boards close after it. Foredge nestles under the lip. Notch offers a respectful hold. It fits like a taut song, no rub, no rattle. He ties the wrap band around the case and toggles it. The book looks ready to travel, but not eager, a good sign. Now the small ceremony of first opening in company. He wraps the book in a cloth and tucks it under his arm. The alley gives way to heat that has learned patience. At the courtyard of scholars the shade of a fig tree keeps the air thoughtful. Mats are laid, voices gather, low and braided. 2 scribes who copied the text sit with reed pens tucked behind ears like resting birds. The librarian, a woman whose bracelets barely talk when she moves, gestures to the mat center. He unrolls the cloth. Hands wash themselves in air without water, a habit here when touching pages. He unties the thongs and lifts each board a finger's breadth, then more. The book learns its path again. He lays it open halfway. The page lies, not flat, not proud, exactly the invitation a reader trusts. A scribe touches the margin with the back of a nail and hums his approval. The librarian presses lightly along each hinge and nods in time with the leather's tiny creak. The owner, quiet through all of this, smiles into his lap. A few practical notes pass like birds. The end bands will keep their courage. The linen under the spine won't sulk in harmattan. The foredge red will hide the year's dust kindly. Someone asks about the ties. He shows the loop and thong, how they rest without imprinting too deeply. He demonstrates the wrap band, toggle threading slit, band circling once like a side embrace. The librarian calls the slipcase a cool room. He takes the compliment as if it belonged to paste, which in a way it does. A short prayer of gratitude for tools and hands is spoken in words that sound like counting and thanking at once. The book receives a small mark on the inside cover, a tiny stamped seal of the library pressed with a heated brass leaf. It darkens the leather by a shade and sits as quiet as a comma. The owner lifts the book. Weight balances evenly at the palms. He places it in his satchel, not among jars or food alone, spine aligned with the bag seam so corners will not argue. He ties the wrap band once more and tucks the toggle so it will not catch. Payment is not made in this moment that flows as the city does, by lists and nods and a table at week's end. But he leaves a gift, a pinch of fragrant resin on the cedar table, when he returns the binder's cloth. For the room, he says, meaning the room deserves a scent better than dust. Back at the shop, the light has moved one hand width toward evening. He cleans the stylus tip on a scrap of leather, oils the paring knife lightly with a whisper from a cotton rag, and sets the bone folder with its back to the also points and edges are not immediately neighbors. The gum arabic in the brass bowl receives fresh water and a stir. Tomorrow it will behave without sulking. He writes a brief line on a slip of paper and tucks it into the ledger, delivered under fig hinges good case it's true, read steady. The ledger accepts the line like a compound taking a pebble. He sits a moment on the mat, hands empty, and watches dust motes argue politely with the last strip of light on the cedar. The room smells faintly of leather warmed earlier, of paste cooling, of resin ready for a ceremony no one will announce. The day has thinned to a slow ribbon. There will be one more task, labels for the library shelf, a small packet of spare ties, but those can be tomorrow's first hello. For now the book sleeps in its cool room, and the tools lean in their rows like listeners who are satisfied. Late afternoon thins into a softer gold. The room's shade lengthens like a shawl pulled over shoulders. Tools keep still in their familiar order. Leather scraps curl in a palm basket like dry leaves. He rolls his sleeves once, not to work harder, only to say he is still listening to the day. A quiet step pauses at the threshold. A young traveler stands there with dust along the hem of his robe, a satchel strap crossing his chest like a drawn line. He lowers his eyes in greeting and opens the satchel with two hands inside. A small bundle wrapped in woven reed reveals its worry, a folio with a tear that began as a nick near the outer margin and W. Entered almost to the text. The scribe's hand is neat and brown-black, the letters like seeds set in straight rows. The young man says he is a student between courtyards, sleeping where shade and kindness agree. The folio is a borrowed text of law and poetry, and he would rather return it whole. The binder nods and gestures to the cedar table. He lifts the folio with two fingers under the tear so the wound does not learn a new path. He exhales slowly. This is a patient problem, he says in a voice that does not frighten paper. From a drawer, he takes a packet of thin tissue wheat starch paper he prepared months ago by cooking paste and brushing it over the thinnest rag fibers until they married. The sheets are light and tough. They remember being water. He mixes fresh paste, a small spoon of wheat starch in a porcelain cup, a trickle of water, a brief stir. Over a tiny brazier he warms it until it clears to a soft gel. He strains it through a muslin square so no lump will surprise a page later. The paste smells like plain bread. The folio lies face down on a sheet of clean parchment. He teases the torn edges together with a bone folder's rounded back, no pushing, only suggestion. He tears narrow strips of mending tissue by hand so their edges are feathered. Straight cuts make visible borders that pages dislike. He brushes a whisper of paste along the tissue and lowers it across the tear, first one side, then turning the leaf and doing the other, so strength lives on both faces. A thin sheet of paper slips above and below as a guard. He lays a smooth slate on top and counts 10 slow breaths. When he raises the slate, the mend holds like healed skin. He burnishes lightly with the smooth pebble until light forgets the seam. Where the tear grazed a line of text, he does not attempt imitation that belongs to scribes. He simply ensures the fibers lie flat so the scribe's letters remain clear. He shows the young man the scene. Read like a river flows past a stone, he says. Do not make a whirlpool. The student smiles at the image and nods as if the page has taught him something beyond letters. The satchel yields one more request, a limp paper cover for a set of notes. Nothing grand, only protection from dust and elbows. He cuts 2 sheets of rag paper a thumb larger than the stack, creases a gentle spine with the bone folder, and stitches 3 quick loops through the fold with waxed linen. He pastes a narrow strip along the spine so the thread does not wander. The cover wears its work plainly. He writes the student's name in small, square letters on the top edge. The student watches as if the letters settle a little nervousness inside him. Payment today is a handful of small silver, not bright but honest, and a measure of grain folded in cloth. Market generosity turned into a binder's supper. The young man sets both on the table, but the binder returns 1 coin to the student's palm. You will need light for your own reading, he says, a practical kindness. He wraps the folio in reed again and ties it with blue thread the indigo woman left earlier. The student bows not deep, just careful, and leaves with the light step of someone carrying something that wishes to remain whole. He notes the repair in the ledger. Folio mend both sides. Starch tissue, student silver 3, grain 1. The letters are small and regular. Ledgers are themselves a kind of binding, days sewn to days with the thread of names. Evening begins to speak through the window. He tiddies in the manner of closing, which is a craft of its own. The paring knife is stroked once on oilstone and wiped on a cloth, then set with its face toward in. The aul's point receives a touch of wax so it will not grow brittle in dry air. Bone folder and pebble nest together at the table's edge hard and smooth, saying good night to hard and smooth. The gum arabic in the brass bowl is decanted into a little lidded jar. The bowl is rinsed and dried. He sweeps the mat with a palm broom, drawing dust toward the threshold in long strokes that rise like quiet rain. Parings gather easily. Paper crumbs rustle into the basket. He lifts the basket to his nose. The mixed scent of leather and fiber is steadier than any prayer. The broom stands in its corner, bristles off the ground so they will forget bends while they sleep. A small knock taps the door frame. The librarian's runner brings the week's tally measured silver and a jar of millet salted with regard. The runner also bears a message. The library wishes 3 more slipcases for existing volumes whose cloth wraps have grown tired. He writes the order on a slip of paper and tucks it under a weight shaped like a crescent. He tips a measure of grain into his own storage jar, the kernels sounding like soft hail. Payment in coin names the work. Payment in food names the household. He pours a splash of clean water over his hands from a glazed jug and dries them on a cloth corner. A final touch to the finished book now sleeping in its cool case, and he writes across the ledger's margin. Shaped and delivered. Hinge's quiet owner smiled. He closes the ledger with a small ceremony. Thread around, not slip-tucked. It is not superstition, only a way of telling the date has been kept. The doorway receives him. For a moment, the alley holds twilight like water in a shallow bowl. Voices are fewer. Gentler, a child counts stones and loses count without alarm. A brazier 2 doors down gives a tiny applause to the pot above it. He looks up at the thin band of sky that belongs to every roof and thinks of how pages meet eyes in every courtyard tonight, under fig leaves and under lamps. He lowers the room's reed blind 2 hands and ties it with its own cord. Inside, cedar keeps its scent, leather keeps its glow, paste returns to cool, thread rests with its wax. The tools are not asleep, exactly, they are thinking in quiet ways, the way wood and steel do when no one asks them to prove anything. Across the city, somewhere a miller sings toward a workshop where steam will rise and a screw will turn. He moves the last slip of paper, tomorrow's list of 3 slipcases, onto the table's center so morning will greet it first. He takes a woven shawl from a peg, drapes it over his shoulders, and presses his palm to the cedar tabletop, as he always does at last light. The table registers the gesture in the small ledger the world keeps without ink. He steps into the alley. Dust lifts once under his sandals and settles again, content to belong to the ground. The door closes with a soft wooden word, and as the binder's room cools to the color of the early moon, we follow that distant song of water. Let's walk beside a millrace in Hunan, where steamed leaves meet wooden molds. And a slow screw press teaches tea how to travel. Dawn arrives by steam before it arrives by light. Along the millrace, a low roof of split bamboo collects night's last coolness, and beneath it the workshop gathers itself from quiet. Water slides past with a silver sound, curved stones guiding it where it should go. A wooden sluice lifts a thin stream toward a wheel that will wake soon, but not yet. For a while, the room belongs to breaths, to dampness, to the small voices of things that remember heat. The press stands at the room's center like a patient tree, 4 square posts mortised into a base of thick timber, a crossbeam above, and through that beam the tall iron screw that turns with a slow, friendly groan. The screw has been rubbed with tallow, its thread gleams where hands have thanked it. On the platform, under the screw, rests a tray lined with woven bamboo and dusted in rice flour. The flour will keep leaves from clinging in the wrong way. It smells like faint porridge, like a breakfast not meant for mouths. A boy arrives first. He is old enough to know the room's manners and young enough to enjoy them. He checks the brazier under the steaming pan, adds a twist of pine, listens to the flame settle, and then lifts the lid just enough to release a little cloud. Tea leaves in their first softness, darkened from yesterday's withering, already pliant. He stirs them with a bamboo rake, not to hurry, only to make sure all leaves learn the same lesson. Steam coats his cheeks. He smiles as if the room has greeted him by name. The foreman steps in with a bundle of molds under one arm. The molds are frames of hardwood, their bottoms open, their inside faces smooth from years of use, their tops fitted with lids that will receive the screw's persuasion. Each mold carries a stamp carved into its lid to calm characters naming stream and hamlet. He sets them on a low shelf, then rubs his palm along the press's beam and the platform. feeling for splinters not yet there. He smooths a place with a scrap of silk and nods to himself. Wood likes to be checked before he is asked to carry weight. By the door, mats of bamboo lie rolled and tied. The boy unties one, shakes it out, and lays it on a table. He dusts it lightly with rice flour from a gourd scoop, taps the scoop twice to wake the powder, then sets beside it a small brush of palm fiber for later. On another table, sheets of paper waytrag paper sized yesterday with rice paste soft, a little crisp, almost shy. They will wrap the bricks once they have learned how to be bricks. A brush rests in a porcelain cup near a covered pot of paste, cooled to a polite thickness. Leaves come from the steamer a basket at a time. They fall in a dark, tender heap onto the bamboo mat. The foreman lifts a handful, spreads it thin, and the leaves shine a little with moisture. He feels with the fingers pads for stems that stand to prod, those he nudges aside. The boy weighs the pile on a balancer beam and two pans, little brass weights sit in their box, their numbers worn by thumbs. The beam's tongue sits level, the boy taps it lightly until it agrees. Each mold will want the same weight, so the press will make the same promise each time. Ready, the boy says in a tone the room recognizes. The foreman lines a mold with a fresh mat, shakes a breath of flour across it, and then feeds the leaves into the frame. He spreads them with quick, open hands, making corners quiet and the middle modestly higher. Like a hill that knows it is being watched, he sets the lid on and slides the mold under the screw. A wooden collar fits between screw and lid so pressure will fall evenly. The foreman lifts the long handle that turns the screw, and the boy takes the other end. Together they walk the circle, not quickly, not as if to win, but in patience, counting under breath. 1, 2, 3. The screw descends. The frame creaks once, then learns to accept. Breath rises during the first squeeze, green, earthy, a little like rain in bamboo. The workshop breathes with it. The foreman pauses, lets the leaves rest under weight for the space of a short story told in his head, a stream crossing a field, a small dog refusing to get its feet wet. Rest matters. Fibers knit while thoughts wander. Then one more half-turn, a pause, and a quarter turn to finish. The handle comes to a stop, as if it has always known that spot. Pressure is not a shout. It is a hand left on a shoulder until both agree. They reverse the turns to lift the screw, and the foreman slides the mold from under. He knocks the frame's side with his knuckles twice. The sound is not hollow, not dull, something in between that means the leaves have taken their first shape. He lifts the lid, peels back the mat, and the brick lies there, still damp, edges soft, but already sure. He transfers it to a drying board, a plank with slats that invite air, and covers it with a thin cloth. Warmth and time will do the rest. The boy returns to the steamer. He rakes fresh leaves and checks the brazier's fire. He adjusts the chimney stone with 2 fingers so smoke flows where it should. From a corner shelf he brings a clay bowl of roasted rice. He eats a pinch dry, then shakes a few grains into the boy-sized pot where water will become tea later. He grins without reason. The foreman grins without showing teeth. Work that keeps its rhythm asks for little else. On the wall hang 2 narrow brooms, their bristles of split bamboo bound with twine. Between cycles, the foreman sweeps the platform so flour and leaf crumbs do not make a false layer under the next brick. He wipes the press's screw with a rag. He turns the press a quarter swing backward to keep the thread thinking kindly. Every gesture carries a lesson about tomorrow. More moles find the line. Two women arrive with bundles of leaves tied in netted baskets that sit easy on the spine. They empty the baskets into the steamer with a practiced tilt, then take seats at the low table to sort stems from tenderness and to fan the finished bricks with palm fans and slow arcs. Their bracelets speak only when their hands are above shoulder height. Today the bracelets keep quiet. Wrapping paper waits, but not yet. Pressed bricks must shed their heat and damp little by little. The boy sets them on end along the slatted boards so air can walk both sides. He listens for a change and smell the moment when green breath becomes a note deeper and warmer. He can name that sense arrival by a look to the rafters. When the lowest bamboo pole no longer wears beads of steam, it is time. In the corner, a shallow pan sits over a low fire. The foreman tosses a handful of finished leaves there, not for the bricks, but for the small tea they will drink. The pan answers with a whisper, and the room shifts from working tea to drinking tea without moving its feet. The boy pours water and sets the lid. A waiting pot says nothing, the best thing a pot can sigh. At the doorway, a porter leans his frame against the jam-packed straps crossing a chest like writing. He nods toward the stack of dried bundles near the far wall, bricks from last week, paper wrap, tied in sixes with split bamboo. He counts with his chin. The foreman nods. Not today, river is up. Tomorrow morning when stones show their backs again. He wipes paste on the back of one paper wrap and tests its tack with a fingertip. He writes the day's mark with a brush, a small seal in red, stream name and shop name in a square. The stamp lives on a little slab of wood that keeps it straight. When paper meets brick, brush strokes will lie on the outside, a promise turned into habit. The tea in the pan is ready. He pours into small cups, 2 sips worth, maybe 3 if a person is short on words. They drink standing, the way people do when chairs are working. The liquor is warm and a little smoky. It finds the tongue and sits, not insistent, not shy. Steam from the steamer thins and then thickens again. The wheel outside finally takes its share of river and begins to turn, its paddles lifting light from water. The pressing becomes a cycle, a soft machine with human parts. Wave, flower, fill, press, pause, lift, knock, carry, set, cover. Hands learn the dance until the dance teaches the hands. Outside, the millwright speaks a little louder. Inside, the screw's friendly groan marks time, 1 brick's worth at a time, 1 morning at a time. By mid-morning the room has chosen its tempo. The screw turns with a low, even note, steam rises, and writes its short poem against the bamboo rafters. The millwright outside keeps the bass lying. The boy's hands move by themselves now, flower, mat, leaves, lid, handle, while his eyes learn to see weight without the scale. The foreman lets him guess once, then checks on the beam balance. The boy's guess is a finger's width light. The foreman drops a small brass weight into the pan, and the beam levels with a content level click. Listen for that sound, he says, not unkindly. It is the sound of sameness. Stamp marks come next, the moment when bricks learn their names. On a low shelf by the window, to carve stamps rest on a slab of smooth wood. One reads the stream's name. To characters like stepping stones, the other names the shop, a square of lines steady as a field. A shallow dish holds red paste made from cinnabar and oil ground to the consistency of slow honey. The foreman takes a clean brush, wakes the paste with a circle or two, and feeds the stamp's face until the red sits even but not thick. He tests on a scrap of paper clear and blurred and then presses the stamp to the brick's face through a thin sheet so texture will not swallow the lines. He lifts straight up. The impression sits calm, neither shouting nor fading. He stamps the second mark beneath the first, forming a small column. The boy watches the way the foreman's wrists stay soft. The mark is in the whole body, not the hand alone. Drying boards fill in rows along the wall, bricks standing on edge like quiet books. A ladder leads to a loft where rafters hold a kinder warmth. The boy climbs with two bricks hugged close, one in each crook of his arm, and sets them on a cross-slat shelf. Up here, the air is still but not stifled. A louver, the gable lets heat drift out in patient drafts. He places the bricks with 2 finger widths between them so each can breathe. He listens. There is a faint, pleasant crackle as surfaces tighten, not a complaint. More like cloth cooling after an iron. Back below, paper wraps begin. Sheets of rag paper, sized yesterday with rice paste so they will resist damp fingers, lie stacked with corners aligned. The women handle them like friendly birds winged light. Each brick, once it has cooled to the temperature of a warm palm, receives its coat, paper folded across the face, turned at the edges, tucked at corners, backside pasted and smoothed with a bamboo spatula. A brush writes on the wraps and flap, day number, press hand, and weight. The brush moves fast enough to stay wet, slow enough to stay legible. A small knot of split bamboo secures 6 bricks into a bundle. The knot is clever, a loop that can be loosened without cutting. The bundles look like little parcels of geometry. Weight must not wander as the day lengthens. The foreman checks the scales. Devotion wood swells in damp, and balances get ideas. He resets the beam with the master weight, a brass square that lives in its own cloth. He tests 3 bricks at random. All are within a pinch of one another. He nods, then sets a spare weight 2 coins wrapped in paper by the boy's elbow for the next guesses. The boy accepts the small challenge as a game. His second guess lands true. The bean tongue kisses its notch and rests. From the door, tea broker enters without stepping fully inside, the way rivers meet ponds carefully. His robe is simple, sleeves neat. He carries his scale in a wooden case, and his opinions in a quiet voice. He opens the case to pans, a forest of small weights, a hook that gleams from use. He asks to see a brick from yesterday and one from last week. The women fetch them, hands knowing which stacks hold which day by the length of dust on the wraps. The broker does not weigh first. He smells. He lifts the brick to his cheek, then to his nose, and breathes in without drama. The scent is deeper today than yesterday, warmer than last week. A shade of smoke sits under the leaf, not on it. He taps the corner with a fingernail. Sound answers with a comfortable dullness, not hollow, not tight. He sets the brick on its edge and presses his thumb into the paper's face to feel the tightness of leaves beneath. He nods once, then turns to his scale because nods like to be translated. Weight is honest, bricks agree with the beam. He stacks them to buy 3 on the bench and measures the bundle against the measure he carries in his head. Stream high, he asks, still watching the pans. This morning, the foreman says. Stones will show their backs by night. The broker grunts in a satisfied way that is not unfriendly. He speaks prices that walk a line between what he can pay and what the workshop should take. The foreman trims a coin's worth by mentioning the stamp's clarity and the evenness of press. The broker counters with the river's mood and the road's. They find the string where both can tie a knot and not regret it later. He sets a small purse on the bench silver and copper in the mix and leaves a written note for the bigger tally when the bundles travel. He requests 10 bundles for the mountains, 8 for a market downriver, and 4 to go with him today when his porter returns with an empty frame. He touches the stamp block with one knuckle, a habit perhaps, or a kind of respect for names, and steps back into sun. The boy, curious but careful, asks the foreman what the broker smelled. Time, the foreman says, smiling in a way that means he has said both a lot and a little. And whether we remember it. The pressing continues. Handle turns, thread descends, leaves net. Between presses, the foreman shows the boy how to read the screw. If it complains, just a note higher, rub tallow here. If the handle wants too much shoulder, we fed the mold more hill than corner. They lift a brick too early on purpose so the boy can see edges slump. Then they press that batch again, and the slump corners stand up straighter. Lessons prefer examples to sermons. A sudden hush in the steam tells the boy the brazier wants a friend. He feeds it a twist of pine and moves the lid a finger to the left. Steam resumes its pound. He strokes the inside of an empty mold with the palm brush to free a thread of leaf that clung there for the pleasure of opposites. He dusts with flour and sets the mat again. The mat's weave shows faintly on the brick sides. It will be hidden by paper but remains as a memory under the wrap. Midday tea happens without announcement. The small pan warms a handful of twisted leaves. Water meets them, lifts their scent. Cups receive 2 sips each. A woman puts a grain of salt on her tongue before sipping, her habit on humid days. The boy tries and decides the salt tastes like late summer, and that he likes late summer. They drink, place cups on the bench edge, and resume the circle. Up in the loft, air grows less shy. The boy climbs with a feather broom to invite movement between rows. A few slow sweeps, nothing that would coax dust to return. He touches one brick lightly on its face. It is almost the temperature of his own skin. Down below, the women begin wrapping the earliest bricks. The foreman stamps before paper arrives. The red marks enjoy living under the wrap's thinness the way ink enjoys living under skin. Milk visible enough to be trusted, faint enough to be polite. A porter appears with a back frame to bowed poles, and a harness crosspiece batted with folded cloth. He crouches, and the foreman loads for bundles, crossing cords, adding a slip of paper under the top tie with the shop seal and the river's name. The porter rises with a little grunt, rocks once to find balance, and the load sets against his back like a question that has already been answered. He steps out without looking back. The boy tries the scale again without weights. He lifts a scoop of leaves and says a number from nowhere. The foreman smiles and does not check. "You were right," he says. The boy grins and only then checks for himself. The beam settles level. He pretends surprise because surprise is a friend of joy. By afternoon's middle, bundles form a modest wall near the door. The press's screw, well fed and well thanked, turns as if it could do so all week. Paper edges stack with their own small shadows. Rice paste thickens a whisker. The foreman tips a spoon of water and stirs until it answers smooth again. Everything answers smooth again when asked gently. Afternoon leans on the roof with a warm forearm. The millrace lowers its voice, as if listening to itself. Inside, the press keeps its steady talk while other tasks stretch their limbs. The foreman lifts a shallow iron pan from a hook and sets it on 3 low stones. A thumb of pine lights the brazier, flame answers with a blue edge that likes work. He shakes a handful of finished leaves already pressed yesterday, then loosened and broken for trial into the pan. The leaves wake with a soft rustle, then give a shy crackle. He stirs with a bamboo spatula, keeping them moving so no one leaf feels singled out. The room receives a deeper fragrance, darker than the morning's steam, and note like dried wood after rain. The boy brings a little sieve and shakes the warm leaves through it into a clay bowl, the larger bits staying above for a second turn, the powder below for blending. He cups the bowl to his face and inhales as if the scent carries a map. The foreman nods. This is what the broker listens for with his nose, he says. Not just today, but the promise of a road. He mixes a pinch of the roasted leaf with yesterday's brick shavings and tastes a tiny crumb on his tongue, bitter first, then round. Then something like warm straw. He does not judge aloud. The room prefers quiet verdicts. At the wrapping table, labels gather, sheets of slim paper, cut into slips the length of a thumb and the width of 2 like pale fish scales. One of the women grinds a stump of ink on an inkstone, adding water in patient circles until the surface turns black with a silk sheen. Her brush is sharp at the tip and soft along the belly. She writes stream name, shop name, day number, weight, and the press hand's small initial that looks like a reed. Her characters hold their strokes like ropes, neither tight nor slack. She stamps each slip with a tiny red dot at the end. Her habit and lays them where air can lift the wetness. The other woman pastes the slips to the paper wraps and flaps with a swirl of rice paste, then smooths them with the pad of her thumb. Each label keeps the same place so hands can find them by feel in dim storerooms. Bundles form as bricks cool, 6 to a tie, 3 lying, 3 riding above, cords crossing twice, a twist that makes a handle. The boy tests the knot and learns where to put his thumb so it releases with dignity later. He threads a narrow strand of split bamboo through the tie and adds a paper tag for distant stores. Market mark, road mark. The tags look like tiny sails. Clouds collect over the ridge where the stream begins. The foreman glances up. The loft knows how to behave in damp weather but appreciates being consulted. He nods to the boy. Together they climb, feather broom and palm fan in hand. The loft holds rows of bricks with the air between them like light woven into cloth. They open the gable louver a finger more and set the fan to a slow back and forth that teaches air to visit each brick equally. The boy touches the underside of a bamboo slat. No beads of moisture yet. Good. He leaves the broom leaning on a rafter, bristles down so shape will stay. They come down with steps that learn the slat spacing and forget it again. A traveler appears in the doorway wearing a hat that has argued with many suns. His back frame leans against the wall, unburdened. His sandals hold a thin lacework of dust. He is one of those who know the road between market and mountain inn so well that his feet keep the map without his eyes. He asks if the press is still pressing, an unnecessary courtesy, like asking a river if it is still wet. He is given a stool and a cup. He drinks, sets the cup on his knee, and watches the screw with patient interest. Bricks travel best when they think they've already arrived, he says after a time. The foreman looks up, amused. The traveler continues, not as a lecture, more as a habit of speech shaped by miles. Pack the cord under something with a smell cedar shavings, if you have them, or paper that slept near cooked rice. Not much, just enough to tell the bricks they are indoors. They ride quieter. The boy files this idea with the others he has liked today. Rain decides to test the roof. First, a single soft coin. Then a thin line of coins. Then a wide gray hush. The millrace brightens under it. Water leaps in narrow arcs where stones disrupt the thought. The wheel turns more eagerly. The paddles slap tiny applause. Inside, someone pulls the bamboo blinds lower along the workshop's open side, and the room narrows to its own work. Steam from the steamer becomes indistinguishable from the rain's breath, the two making a shared curtain. Humidity wants an opinion now. The foreman moves a small clay pot of charcoal under the wrapping table and wakens the coals with a pinch of pine. The heat is not for fingers, only for air. It keeps the paper's paste from thinking it lives on a shore. He touches a wrapped brick and checks for tack, no stick, just warmth. He sets a small pot of quicklime on the shelf to keep the corners damp, proud of itself. Lime likes to eat moisture politely. Tools are shifted a handspan farther from the blind's edge, the paste pot, the stamp block, the red dish. Rain loses half its argument. The boy climbs again to the loft. He holds his palm near the rafters, not to feel heat but to read movement. He learns that damp air is heavier than he thought, and that the fan must be slower now, not faster. He places two thin sticks under a shelf's edge to tip the bricks a whisper steeper, so drops will choose air rather than paper. Small physics wearing soft shoes. Below, the foreman stamps a last row before the next batch presses out. He cleans the stamped face on a folded rag, presses it once onto paper to be sure no residue remains to smudge the next name, and returns it to its slab. He oils the screw with a thumb of tallow rubbed into a scrap of cloth. The screw sighs appreciatively and turns with its comfortable sentence. The traveler eyes the bundles near the door and the rain beyond. He says he will wait until the road's skin is less new. He tells the boy about spice caravans where bricks of tea ride like bricks of salt. The bundles between sacks of pepper and cloth. The entire load wrapped once in oil-scented paper so rain cannot interfere. He describes storage in mountain inns, bricks stacked on end on boards set away from walls, gaps between bundles wide enough for a hand to pass, narrow enough for mice to give up. Let them breathe, he says. They are like travelers. They do better when they are not pressed after the press. Rain eases to a steady thread. The boy walks to the door and holds his palm out, catches 3 drops. Watches them skip down his wrist. He wipes his hand on his apron and returns to the scale. He lifts a scoop of leaves and guesses again. The foreman, for fun, pretends to weigh and nods sullenly. The boy pretends to be surprised again, then grins. They practice seriousness as a form of play. In a lull between presses, the women fold a stack of wraps with their slips already attached. The top sheet picks up a whisper of charcoal warmth from the pot below. The scent awakens in the paper just enough to please the traveler's notion about indoors. The boy slides a shaving of cedar under the next bundle's cord, proud to be early with an old idea. The rain finishes like a long sentence with a short period. Drips count themselves from the eaves. The louver remains open. The fan keeps its slow path, and the loft breathes as if it had been doing so all day, which in a way it has. The press continues its gentle groan and rest. Leaves enter, bricks leave, and the room believes in tomorrow without needing to say so. Afternoon tips toward the hour when shop lights imagine being stars. The traveler lifts his frame, adds one bundle with the foreman's nod for might ask too much of a wet path, and swings the harness across his shoulders. He steps into the lane, tests the ground with a toe, and then trusts it. His hat receives a last drop from the eave with grace. He goes. Inside, the boy stirs the brazier to help the steamer's last load think kindly, and the foreman writes 2 lines in the day's book. Rain-tempered loft, press even, label set. Broker returns tomorrow. He closes the book and taps it once with the brush's wooden end, a habit he could not explain even if asked. Evening begins by taking color out of edges. The millwright slows a little, as if it too prefers the softer pace. Inside, the press finishes a turn and holds. The foreman lifts the lid, peels the mat, and sets the fresh brick upright on the slatted board. Steam has thinned to a suggestion. The room smells of green turned warm, of bamboo cooled from effort, of paste deciding to be memory. Bundles gather near the door, stacked too high in a measured wall. Cords cross in their tidy habit, paper faces lie smooth, labels aligned like the steps of a careful path. The boy slides his palm across a bundle to feel for unevenness. The brush of paper under skin says everything is even enough. He tucks a cedar shaving under the top cord of each stack, remembering the traveler's advice. The shavings sit like modest secrets. The broker returns, dry now and at ease with the road. He brings a low table from the threshold and sets it inside the line of shadow. On the table, a small scale, a leather purse, a folded paper book of accounts with a brush tucked through its tie. He greets with a tilt of the chin. The foreman answers with a nod and a gesture toward the bundles. They do not rush. Accounts prefer slowness to accuracy's sake. He chooses 2 bundles at random, unties each with a twist that dignifies the knot, and taps the face of the top brick with a fingernail. The sound answers, dim, steady. He weighs a brick from each pan. Weight. Pan then writes a tiny mark in his book. The boy watches how the brush makes numbers with fewer strokes than letters. The broker smells a brick as before, closes his eyes briefly, then opens them with a satisfied look. River has remembered itself, he says. The foreman agrees with a small sound that does not disturb any ghosts. Coins come out of the purse, silver mostly, some copper, enough to speak for road and risk and fairness. The broker lays them in lines of 5, then 4, then 1, each line a little river. The foreman gathers them into cloth with a sewn-in pocket so they will not argue with each other on the walk home. A slip of paper arrives from the broker's brush. Day, number of bundles, total weight, price, mark of his house. The foreman sets his own mark on another slip and ties it under the top cord of the stack that will travel with the broker tonight. Paper shakes hands with paper. The boy lifts the bundle and finds a shoulder for it. The porter hooks the load with calm hands. Accounts settle like stones at the bottom of a stream. A tasting follows, not ceremony, just obedience to habit. The foreman carries the small pan to the brazier and scatters a pinch of roasted leaf into hot water. He adds a grain of salt, remembering the woman's way from earlier. Into another cup he pours a little rice water from a jar of pail, starchy drink the boy sometimes takes when tired. They sip each in order, straight tea first, then tea with the faintest salt, then a mouthful of rice water to find the tea's echo. The broker smiles after the salted sip. "Road likes that," he says. The boy nods, because the road is always thirsty. The press wants closing. The foreman wipes the screw's exposed thread with a cloth that carries a hint of tallow. He turns the handle until the lid sits level with the platform. Neither pressed nor free, so wood will wake tomorrow without finding it has learned to work. He dusts the platform with the palm brush, then rubs the beam where shoulders often lean. A small cloth, slightly oily, gets tied around the screw's housing to keep night air from teaching it rust. He sets the molds in a row on their shelf, mats rolled and tied with their cords lying like sleeping snakes above them. The flour gourd gets its cork. The paste pot receives a paper lid with a finger's width of gap so it can breathe, and still remember to be paste in the morning. In the loft, the boy gives the fan 3 last quiet swings and closes the louver to the line they use when stars can be seen through its teeth. He touches the face of a brick. It is nearly warm now. He likes that word merely because it means the work is done even if the day goes on. He descends, each run a familiar thought. He brushes a few leaf crumbs into a pan and takes it to the threshold for the small birds who come when the room sleeps. The broker cinches his bundle, bows a short bowl, and leaves in a way that does not teach the door to swing. The porter follows, loaded and confident, steps careful where the lane holds the day's last dampness. The boy listens to their footfalls go from wood to earth to the suggestion of distance. He likes that sequence too. The foreman opens the day's book. He writes 3 lines, rain eased, loft steady, 18 bundles ready, 10 departed. He adds a dot to mark the boy's steady weight guessing, and sets the brush on the book's tie to dry. He counts the coins into their pockets, copper to the small sleeve, silver to the deeper one, pats them into stillness, then tucks the cloth into a niche above the bench where thieves would have to grow patience to find it. Sweeping sounds begin. The women roll the bamboo blinds up to hands so night can look in without coming in. The boy sweeps leaf dust and flour to the door in long strokes that admire the floor. He lifts mats and shakes them once, not twice. Once is enough and does not teach fray. The foreman empties the brazier into an ash pot, scatters the ash thin along a patch of ground that will take it into something useful tomorrow. Ash likes to be helpful in more than one place. In the after-hum of work, the millrace grows clear again. Water still moves, but it has given back a little energy to the hill. Frogs wonder if they should speak. They decide on a later hour. A moth visits the lamp and then behaves itself. The boy runs a finger along the stamp's carved face, then wipes the finger on his apron. Cinnabar prefers respect. He puts the stamp to bed on its slab face up, so its name does not lean on the wood. They set the finished bundles in a taller stack against the wall whose feet stay dry in heavy rains. The foreman slides a board beneath to keep air under. The boy adjusts labels so all read the same way. He slips a thin slot between 2 stacks where paper looked like it wished for company. The slot becomes company. He tugs once at a cord and watches the whole walnut move. He smiles to himself and does not tell anyone. There is a last small tasting, for comfort more than judgment. Water warmed in a clay pot, a few grains of roasted rice, a pinch of today's finds. They drink standing, each with a different rhythm. The women sip quickly, clean the cups with a half-turn of the wrist, and set them upside down on the bench edge. The boy sips slowly and holds the empty cup until the clay gives back its little stored heat. The foreman takes 2 sips, then 1 from the rice-water jar, then breathes as if the breath itself were tea. Closing is not a single moment, it is a thread. The foreman ties the press handle to its post with a half-knot that can be persuaded with one hand in the morning. He lays the long turning bar along the beam, chalking one end with a tiny mark to show which side prefers the first pull. He pinches the lamp wick shorter so it will not smoke later, and leaves the lamp sleeve half down to tell it the hour. The boy fetches his shoulder strap and tries the weight of one last bundle, not to carry, just to know. He sets it back with a nod, then smooths the top paper as if smoothing hair. He places the cedar shavings where nose and hand will find them first at dawn, so the bricks will remember what the traveler said about indoors. He blows out a small breath he did not know he held. They stand in the doorway a moment. The millrace moves like a long sentence written in a careful hand. Fireflies begin to hang their tiny lanterns over the wet edge of the path. The foreman closes the door not quite shut, so the room can keep listening to water while it sleeps. The boy lifts the latch with his finger and lets it fall, testing its small voice. Good. It will say the right word in the morning. Inside, the press rests like a tree that has decided to dream. Paper sleeps under its own weight. Paste remembers. Stamps do not. All of this is correct. Night finishes the day the way a brush lifts from a stroke quietly. With a little flourish you feel more than see. The millrace wears a thinner shine, and the wheel turns by habit now, not by need. Inside, the workshop holds its own warmth like bread under a cloth. The lamp wick, cut short earlier, keeps a steady pearl of light. It falls across the press and the stacked bundles and turns every cord into a soft line. The foreman and the boy return from the lane with hands washed in the pump's cold water. They dry on the same cloth that dries cups, and then stand between press and door to let eyes choose night. The air smells of bamboo and faint ash of tea that has decided to stay leaf even after all the pressing. The foreman sets a small basket on the bench and empties it. Inside, a handful of tomorrow's withered leaves waits for choosing. Selection, tonight, is a touch language. He pinches a leaf and rolls it between fingers. The leaf should bend like a respectful bow, not crack, not sulk. He sorts 3 small piles, soft as rain, firm as a promise, stubborn as a mule. He nods toward the firm pile. Morning wants these, he says. They learn shape kindly. The boy cups a palmful, listens to the dry whisper they make, and tips them back. He will remember the sound. From a shelf, the foreman brings down a cloth that once was a shirt and spreads it on the bench. He pours a scoop of fines powder and tiny leaf crumbs onto it, draws the corners together, and ties a soft knot to make a sachet. He crushes the bundle once, gently. For scent, he says, and lays it near the stacked bundles so the night will learn to smell like indoors. The boy adds 2 cedar shavings to the sachets, not for the traveler's sake. The knot receives them and says nothing. They walk the room, not to check, more to greet. The press rests with its turning bar chalked for morning. The molds lie in order, mats rolled, and labeled with a thin reed slip stuck under the strings. The stamp blocks sleep face up on their slab. The paste pot sighs under its paper lid. The gum breathes through the tiny gap. The boy touches the beam where shoulders lean most often and feels the day's memory. He smiles into the wood without anyone seeing. An early porter will come before dawn. The foreman measures a path across the floor with his eyes straight, walk from bundles to door, no foot catching on stray tools, no cords thinking they are snakes. He pulls the bundles intended for the mountain road half a pace forward, their labels all reading toward the door, their cords given one last press with the palm. He slips a slat of bamboo between wall and stack, only as thick as a corn, so air can thread there and not make mischief. The ledger will want its last lines. He opens the paper book and writes slow numbers that do not spill. Total bricks, bundles, wraps used, paste mixed, flour scooped, cedar shavings remaining. He adds a small note about the traveler's advice, cord under cedar, room smell travels with them, and sets the brush down across the book's die to dry and to remember where it lives. The lamp's pearl lowers without smoke. They drink a last small cup of water that warmed its mind on a few roasted crumbs, nothing more, and listen to themselves swallow. The boy places the empty cup upside down on the bench to show it has finished being a cup tonight. The foreman leaves his cup upright to say the room may drink from it if it wishes. They step outside for a slow lap along the millrace. Stones keep their dark shoulders just above the water, slick but not dangerous. In the shallows, minnows flicker in a way that feels like thinking. The boy bends to gather a thin branch fallen from the willow. He snaps it shorter and uses it as a pointer to name things softly to himself. Plank, post, paddle, pebble. The foreman does not interrupt naming. Names and sleep have a good friendship. At the far end of the sluice, a gate wears a rope handle. He lifts it one notch to give the wheel less work through midnight. The wheel thanks him by paying less attention to itself. The night sky pushes a few stars through a cloud's edge. The stars consider the water and give it a little company. A moth registers their passing and forgets it immediately. They return to the door, and the foreman sets the latch so it rests, but does not grip, a gesture that lets the porter enter with a soft knock rather than rattle a sleeping house. The boy folds the cloth that lives by the door, squares its corners, and lays it where hands will find it in the first unlit minute of morning. He places the cedar sachet atop the bundle stack so the smell can wander the wall at its own pace. Sleep happens to rooms too. The lamp wick lowers again. A cricket under the sill writes a brief note, then loses interest. The boy's yawn arrives, chastened and slow. He gathers his shoulder strap and touches the stamp's carved face with a clean finger, just a hello for tomorrow, and steps into the lane. The foreman stays a breath longer to listen to the wheel's last word, then covers the lamp with its sleeve and leaves as well, door leaning closed but not latched, the sound of water like a blanket. The porter's knock comes while the stars still own the sky. It is the polite knock of someone who carries weight for a living. The foreman answers with the door's first word, wood on wood, well acquainted. They lift two bundles to the frame, slip the cord through the crosspiece, and tuck a reed under the tie so the knot will not bite the paper. The porter bends, the load climbs his back, and the frame rests along his spine as if it were a friend from childhood. He receives a cedar shaving under the strap and grins at the indulgence. He pads away, steps measuring the solid parts of the path without stepping on the path's opinions. When the porter has taken the first load's distance, they load the second. The boy walks it to the threshold and rests it on his thigh the way he has seen the foreman do a small rehearsal of future strength. He sets it down again. The rehearsal is enough. The foreman adds a final slip under the cord, stamped with the shop mark more for comfort than identification. Comfort likes to be repeated. Dawn is still a rumor when they close the door for real. The latch drops with its small approval. The millwright prepares its morning sentence. The screw will be woken, the mats unrolled, the flour shaken like quiet snow, the steamer undressed with a rake. The sachet scent hangs in the workshop like a remembered story. The boy breathes it in and keeps a little behind his teeth, as if scent could be saved that way. Maybe it can. They turn to the lane. The sky beneath the ridge is a thin wash of gray tea. Somewhere far off a rooster tries his voice and then owns it. The foreman rests his palm on the door, says nothing, and moves his hand away as if taking a promise with him for later. Work here is done for the night, and the bricks are ready for road and water. And water leads to coast, and coast to the wide dark where stars write their slow maps. As the millwright learns the first color of day and the press imagines its next turn, let us step beyond the last field and into warm salt air. We will ride a double canoe where lashings creak like sleeping rope, and a navigator reads a sky without paper or ink. Night here is not empty, it is printed with slow instructions. The double canoe rocks in warm black water that feels like the inside of a long breath. Two hulls, twin wooden moons, hold the sea apart just enough so a small platform can live between. Lashings of coconut fiber cross and recross in neat diagonals. Each knot knows its promise and keeps it in the quiet language of cord. Above, a crab claw sail sleeps in a narrow fold, tied modestly to the yard so wind can think while people listen. There is no hurry, distance will still be there at dawn. The navigator sits near the fore platform, knees easy, back straight without stiffness. Beside him, a low rail carries a star compass painted in small, pale marks, a memory aid for the crew. Though the true compass lives in his head, he rests his fingers on the rail, shifting them from notch to notch as certain stars rise. He does not count time in minutes, but in risings, crossings, and sinkings. Tonight, a bright white star stands low to the north, steady but not scolding. Near the east, a red star tests the horizon, then owns it. Far overhead, a scattering like salt marks the roof of the sky. When those grains lean, he knows the canoe has drifted a little past his polite line. The platform smells of sun-salted wood and dried pandanus mats. A calabash of fresh water sits in a woven cradle. It tips forward with the canoe's slow nod and then sits square again. Beside it, a little bundle of cooked taro and breadfruit sleeps under leaves. A shell pendant hangs at the navigator's neck, worn by skin and air. The pendant knows his pulse. He knows the pulse of the swells. He lets his palm settle against the deck and listens with his hand. Swell reads like script. One long line arrives from the east, the memory of trades that boo all day. Another, lower and slower, comes from a far south, the afterword of a storm they never saw. A third, thinner, feels like a question. He maps these lines into a body chart. One swell against the heel, another against the small of the back, the doubtful one across the shoulder when he leans. To hold the correct path, he keeps one swell pressing the canoe's starboard hull just so, and another crossing under the lashings like a soft drum. If the drum's beat slides to the wrong rib, he nudges the steering paddle a palm's breadth. The canoe obeys without complaint. A crewman, quiet with practice, checks lashings along the cross beams. He walks in a knee bend that matches the sea, palm pressing each knot as if taking its temperature. Another tends the sheet on the sleeping sail. No pull now, only a readiness. A third bails from the leeward hull with a carved wooden scoop, water leaving the boat like small thoughts leaving a crowded mind. Their hair smells of salt and a little coconut oil, their hands smell of rope and wood. Voices stay small. When speech is needed, it is shaped to carry only as far as the next pair of ears. This may feel unusual today, but for many ocean peoples, navigation was a craft of memory and senses. Stars, swells, the color of water near shoals, the run of clouds above unseen islands all offered names and numbers before metal compasses and paper charts. What others write with ink, the navigator keeps in muscle and bone. He raises his eyes. On the horizon, a low cloud glows a shade lighter than the night around it. He notes its exact seat against the star compass. Clouds that hold a steadied pale often sit above atolls whose lagoons lend their reflected light to the bottom of the sky. He does not chase it. He lets it sit there as a witness. Far to the west, another cloud stands with a flat underside. Highland often wears that style. He files that shape with the others a ledge for later. He tests the wind with his cheek. It tastes like warm ironwood and distant rain. He wets a finger with his tongue and holds it above his head. The side that cools tells him that the breath has backed a finger's worth since twilight. He rests a hand on the steering paddle and lets its long blade find a new angle, no more than the width of a thumb. The canoe's talk with the water adjusts. The drumbeat under the lashings returns to its familiar rhythm. The star house he wants tonight is a low doorway at the eastern edge, the place where a certain bright star rises when the canoe's path is true. It has not come yet. Before it does, a smaller star must visit the northern shoulder of the sky. When it passes overhead to the south, he will know they have not wandered too far north or south. This is latitude without numbers, measured in the arc from ear to ear. He lifts one hand and measures another star's height with fist and thumb. The sky answers his hand, the canoe answers the sky. He opens the leaf bundle and breaks a piece of breadfruit. He passes it along. Fingers brush, soft as cloth. He sips from the calabash and wipes a drop from his chin with the back of his hand. No one says cheers aloud. The ocean prefers simpler words. Here, now enough. On the aft platform, a small gourd rattle hangs from a line. When the lashings strain too suddenly or the canoe's nose tries to dig, the rattle taps wood on its own. It serves as a mild alarm, not for danger, only for drift in mood. Tonight it remains a quiet ornament. A line of fishing hooks, bone and shell, whispers against a beam with a sound like teeth in a small laugh. They are not fishing now. Night is for the road. He looks again to the horizon. Phosphorescent tiny sea light stirs along the bow as if someone scattered a handful of ground stars across the water. When the canoe keeps course, the pattern stays centered. When the steering paddle forgets its small promise, the scatter leans to one side. He watches for leaning when clouds hide the sky. The sea offers backup. A low chant begins near the mid-beam. Only a few notes on an old line, no words to snag the mind. It sets a cadence for the bailing, the checking, the small tasks that keep a floating house tidy. The navigator does not lead it. He lets it wrap the crew in something as soft as pandanus. He hums once and then listens. Silence is also a kind of steering. If the day had been windy, the sail might hold some of that energy now. Instead it rests furled, a pale triangle traced against a darker piece of night. The canoe makes its way by the sea's push and by a slow, measured paddle when the helmsman asks. Paddles dip and rise without splash, the boat breathes. He speaks 3 words over his shoulder, naming the next star that will lift the east. The helmsman answers with a nod the navigator does not need to see. A boy on his first long passage, wrapped to the chin in a mat, rolls onto one elbow and peeks under hair to catch the star's first tooth. He is not told not to look. Looking is part of becoming. He settles again and lets strings of light find him behind his eyelids. The navigator's show pendant cools as a small cloud hosts the moon for a while. Without the moon's path, the stars grow more precise. With the moon's, the sea and skin grow friendlier. He imagines the pattern of dawn birds that will come there, and how their choices will confirm or refuse the long lines of sky. He adjusts the paddle the width of a little finger. The canoe answers yes. Overhead, the salt scatter leans at last. The red star in the east lifts clean. He moves his hand along the rail, 1 notch to the left, then 2. The course is good. He releases a breath he had not borrowed. The crew hears nothing special. They have learned to trust the unannounced. Behind the canoe, wake draws twin furrows, taut and parallel, catching light like thread pulled through dark cloth. Ahead, the horizon promises nothing, and, by that nothing, gives everything. Wind arrives like a polite guest, felt first on cheek, then heard, then seen in the smallest curl along the water. The navigator tilts his face, accepts the greeting, and nods toward the helmsman. No call, no clatter. Hands move to untie the sail's sleeping fold. The crab claw opens with the grace of a palm leaf waking, ribs of the yard showing for a heartbeat before cloth finds its shape. The sheet pays up the length of a forearm. The sail drinks only what it can hold without spilling. The canoe leans 1 finger into the wind, and then settles, as if it were always meant to be here. The new breath asks for a trim. A crewman crouches the windward beam, hand on the sheet, eyes on the sail's leading edge. He listens for the faintest rattle that means the cloth is bored. He inches the line until the rattle grows shy and disappears. The hulls hum, not with speed, but with agreement. Spray does not volunteer. The canoe's talk with the swell changes key and keeps the same song. The navigator checks the star that rose red earlier. It has climbed a hand and a half, now more amber than red, content to be an ordinary light among others. He slides his fingers another notch along the star compass rail, a small move for a long consequence. A short bird call carries from somewhere behind, not a bird, just the creak of a lash settling into its night posture. He smiles at the trick the sea enjoys disguises. Clouds at the eastern edge shift from black to the kind of gray a river's stone keeps when wet. He reads their undersides. A cool gray can mean open water. A warm gray can betray the blur of sand on a shoal far away. A pale belly sometimes hints at lagoon light rising into cloud. Tonight the undercolor is ordinary, not quite warm, not especially cool. He files it under watching rather than deciding. Birds begin their circuits long before people would call it morning. A pair of seabirds sweeps low, long wings barely tapping wind, crossing from starboard to port in a lazy arc. Islanders say birds prefer to fly a certain pattern when they are commuting outward in evening, inward before dawn. He notes the direction with a look to the rail marks. If their arc repeats and tightens, it will be a soft sign of land within a day's hunger. For now it is a ribbon in the dark, nothing to tie yet. Midnight gathers itself without the moon's help, then the moon rolls free of a cloud and surveys the crew like a kind ant. Light does not flatten the stars, it smooths them. The navigator lets the steering paddle rest against the rail for a breath while he checks lashings. He moves along the crossbeams with a knee-bent walk the canoe recognizes. Each knot is a small promise he asked earlier, and now asks again. He presses his thumb against fiber, feels for damp, listens for the tone. A stretched cord makes a thread of sound almost too thin to hear. Where the note is sharp, he rubs a little coconut oil into the lashing and works the knot with 2 fingers until the note softens. Where a turn has shifted, he rocks it back home with the heel of his hand. At the aft platform, a basket of small things keeps the canoe civilized: spare cord, a bone needle, a shell scraper, a candle nut already strung for burning if some other light sulks, and a few pebbles polished by the sea for reasons no one needs to name. He adds a short length of fresh cord to the basket and removes a frayed one. The old cord will dry by sunrise and find a second life as a tie for something that minds less. Food makes a quiet circle. A leaf bundle opens, and roasted taro passes from palm to palm. A child wakes, takes a bite the size of a shell, and closes his eyes again with a soft sound that belongs to mouths and dreams. The navigator drinks a small mouthful of water and wets the sail's windward edge with 2 fingers so the cloth will remember to be supple. He brushes a palm across the deck. Salt dust answers like fine sand, a map of the day's breath under heel and hand. He returns to the steering paddle, lays it in the crook where shoulder likes to live, and lets the blade read the water's sentence. The paddle is long, its grip smooth from many seasons. He does not lever it so much as lean near it, letting weight ask rather than force. The canoe responds with a slight change in the hum across the lashings. The gourd rattle remains indifferent. This is good. A low band of cloud rises in the south. He notes its height with fist and thumb, and then glances to the star that serves as a width measure between 2 brighter neighbors. The gap is the same. Latitude holds. He allows himself a thought of a certain atoll green ring bright lagoon, a pass whose current barks harder on an outgoing tide. Not tonight. Not yet. The thought is a sweet kept in the mouth without biting. The crewman on the sheet shifts his seat the length of a palm. His movement changes the sail's curve by almost nothing and, by almost nothing, improves the canoe's talk with the wind. He looks to the navigator and gets a small nod he can feel more than see. He settles. A line of looks whispers again, and then is still. When clouds pull across the eastern stars, the sea keeps the test. The navigator watches the phosphorescent scatter along the bow. He lets his eye turn. Soft, hard eyes miss pattern. Soft eyes see the writing of turbulence. When the pattern centers, the course holds. When it slants, he strokes the paddle almost lazily to nudge the nose a little. The luminous dust recenters. He imagines the scatter as a string drawn through water by a steady hand. He holds that string on the canoe seam. The moon gives a lesson it teaches every voyage it rises where it will, but its path sketches a slow arc that can serve as a yard. Tonight its arc leans toward the south a little. If he keeps the moon at the same shoulder for a watch, and the swell keeps its drum along the same rib, the canoe will hold the line even when clouds discourage stars. He names, not aloud, the shoulder that will host the moon left now, then right when the watch turns. He tells the helmsman in a few words, moon at the ear, and touches his own ear. The helmsman nods and smiles into the dark as if someone told a good joke. Half a watch later, the wind sulks. The sail needs different attention now, less sheet, a slightly fuller belly to learn what breath remains. The crewman slacks a thumb's worth, holds, then takes it back half. The cloth murmurs approval. The canoe's speed is not a number anyone says. It lives in the shape of the wake and the note of water under the bow. Tonight it is enough to make the horizon come at a walking pace. A bird returns, perhaps the same, perhaps a cousin. It crosses forward, then returns along nearly the same path, then climbs and slides inland if inland exists at a low angle, as if a line tied its breastbone to a place off the port bow. The navigator watches without pursuit. He places a thought pin where the bird fell from sky to unseen ground. If to more agree, he will move the canoe's conversation with the wind just a finger toward that memory. The helmsman hums a fragment of a reef song one singers learn when they clean fish under a tree near home. The notes are soft enough to not wake the boy, strong enough to remind bones where they grew. The navigator joins for 2 breaths, and then stops so he can hear water again. The canoe takes the song into its timbers and releases it, not as sound, but as steadiness. A small squall shows its thin shoulders to windward. In the dark it looks like a place the night forgot to fill. The navigator reads the edges, no sharp cap, base not tasting the sea too harshly. He keeps the sail as it is, and lets the squall walk its brief path in the sky, patting the water once or twice as a relative would pat a child's head in passing. A few drops visit faces and hands. Salt accepts them without argument. The moon approaches the place where it will share the sky with first gray. The navigator rehearses dawn. He imagines the band where night thins, and how the low paling will erase the smaller stars first, then the higher ones, leaving the bright witnesses. He names the star he wants to see just before day. Its rising aligns with the notch in the boom, and the seam on the platform where 2 planks meet. He slides his fingers along the rail to the next notch. The crew changes posture in tiny ways, one shoulder, one knee, the way a foot rests under a beam, settling into the last stretch before light. He wets his finger again and tastes the wind. It carries a dry sweetness that the open ocean owns when no land interposes it. He decides not to change a thing. Holding the line is sometimes more work than finding it. He lets the paddle be a weight rather than a lever, the canoe a partner rather than a burden. The wake keeps its twin stitches straight. The night has been a book they could read without touching. Soon the page will turn itself. First gray is not a line but a slow permission. It begins as a thinning at the rim where sea pretends to touch sky, then gathers into a band the color of cooled tin. The stars comply one by one, stepping back without offense. A few bright ones linger as courteous elders. The crew shifts a little the way knees unlock, the way a shoulder finds a new rest. The sail keeps its small belly. The canoe tastes the new light and seems to approve. The navigator watches for small colors inside the gray. A faint wash of coral breeds along one cloud, pink like an open shell. Farther north, a thin green lives at the edge of another cloud, nothing dramatic, just a sea glass hint. He files both. At dawn, warm tints above a fixed place sometimes whisper of land that warms the underside of cloud. Cool tints can mean long water. This morning reads mostly open, with a suggestion to the north that is not yet a sentence. Birds begin to draw their paths like threads laid over cloth. Two terns appear first, stitching low and from starboard, and then angling toward port, as if a gentle hand guided them. A frigate bird rides higher, no hurry in its long wings, turning once in a wide circle, as if reading the same book as the canoe. Islanders often say birds tell the last page before land out late and early. He notes the directions portward, then higher, then inward, and does not change course yet. One circuit is a rumor. 3 circuits make a plan. He asks for the sail to hold the wind a breath tighter. The sheepman gives a thumb, the cloth smooths its leading edge, and the canoe's hum settles into a new vowel. The steering paddle remains a leaning more than a lever. Under the lashings, the drumbeat of swell keeps to the familiar rib. The navigator counts the low swells against his heel and confirms the long memory of the trades remains underneath. Breakfast water warms without fire's drama. A candle nut kukui strung on a thin skewer becomes a modest light, and heat both. The nut burns with a steady, tame flame. A small pot sits above it on 3 shells holding water, and a pinch of roasted breadfruit crumb. The liquid will not boil, it will remember warmth. The child stirs with the end of a sliver of wood and blows a breath that the flame ignores. When the navigator is offered the cup, he takes one small sip and returns it. Warmth travels well in mouths. Clouds to the south begin to show higher bellies that flatten near their bases, a shape sometimes worn by highland. The flattening is not strong, he notes it, and keeps it in the drawer where later is filed. He prefers to confirm with water. He closes his eyes and lets his palm read the deck again. The swell set from the east holds its line. A possible cross ripple tickles the lashings a hair different than in night. He asks the helmsman to hold steady while he does a swell test. The test is patience. He lets the canoe ride a long roller without asking the paddle to speak, then listens for a returning ripple, water thrown back from something solid far off. A faint, shallow flutter touches the platform and goes. He waits for it again. When it returns after the same count, he knows it is not the boat imagining things. Reflected swell means a wall somewhere, reef cliff, or the long side of a big atoll. The flutter comes from port forward. He moves one finger width along the rail, only one. Course remains good. The flutter joins the day's chorus as a quiet harmony rather than a warning. The boy wakes fully and sits wrapped in his mat like a conch in its lip. He watches birds now, counting flights without knowing he is counting. The navigator nods to him and points with his mouth a small tilt to a turn, returning low with apparent intention. The boy follows the line with his nose, then with his eyes. He smiles at having learned a new way to point. A thin brush of pink writes itself higher. The sea near the bar writes back in quicksilver marks where small fish gather under the surface at first light. The crewman at the sheet shifts weight along the beam, smooth as a cat changing windowsills. The sail keeps interest without becoming proud. A gourd rattle taps only once as a lashing settles to a daytime posture. No correction needed. Sometimes boats adjust to morning the way bodies do. Gentle commentary belongs here. In many canoe traditions, noon can be taken by shadow. Not a number on paper, but a feeling of height when the sun makes the shortest, most centered shade. Some navigators keep a mast mark or a notch on a rail that shows where that noon shadow tip should fall for the latitude they intend. Others test with fingertip and memory the distance between sun and horizon measured in fists stacked from the rim, the number of fists at noon remembered from other days on that line of sea. There are many good ways to know the same truth. He prepares for noon without watching the sun as a clock. He ties a thin cord to a short stick and sets the stick upright in a little lump of wax near the center line of the platform. When the sun climbs higher, the stick's shade will shorten toward the cord's knot. He will mark with a dab of charcoal where the tip rests at the shortest, then compare it with a mark from another voyage on this path, kept faint on the beam. It is a maker's check, not a master's rule. The child offers him a piece of dried fish the size of a finger. He eats it into bites, tasting smoke and sea and the hands of someone who sat by a cook fire long before this night. He drinks a small mouthful of water and rubs the back of his neck where salt sits like fine sand. A crewman sings to lines of a breadfruit planting chant, then stops exactly where the lines ask him to stop. The canoe hums the rest. Bird circuits increase. 3 turns in a row cross in from the same bearing, then swing to port and vanish. The frigate bird returns and wanders higher, then floats in place for a heartbeat as if testing air that has already met land. The navigator lets the canoe hold its line and counts 1 more circuit. The next pair arrives along the same path and then turns inward with the same curve. 2 is strong. 3 is a promise. He moves his hand along the rail 1 more small notch, then returns it. Steadiness remains the order. Land may be there tomorrow's middle rather than today's end. The swell test repeats itself kindly, faint return after a count that fits a distance measured in hours. He says a few words to the helmsman that amount to as you are. The helmsman keeps the paddle as a thought rather than a command. The child, encouraged, counts the breaths between long rollers in a whisper and grins when the number repeats. The candle nut finishes its service. The wick dies with dignity. The small pot's warmth holds enough to offer 2 last sips. The boy takes 1. A crewman with the sheet takes the other. Both cups return empty and happy. The navigator gathers the nuts. Cooled bead of ash in a leaf. Ash keeps sails polite when rubbed thinly at the edges, then tucks the leaf under the rail for later. Sun rises to a height the hand can measure. Fists stacked from horizon up to the sun. 1, 2, 3 and a thumb. He does not say the number aloud. He matches the feel to another morning on another path and finds a comfortable echo. Noon will fall a little high today, as expected for this latitude and season. He smooths the waxed base of the little stick and watches the shadow shorten finger by finger. Before the shortest moment, he checks the deck seam that serves as a silent ruler. The shadow tip pauses at a place he recognizes just shy of a tiny dent in the wood made by a dropped shell seasons ago. He touches the dent and smiles because objects remember for us. He puts a thumb smudge of charcoal where the shadow stops and lets the sun begin to lengthen the shade again. Noon has offered its small bow and left the stage. He speaks softly to the crew, all as it should be, not a boast. a porch-light phrase. The helmsman hums in reply, and the sheetman adjusts the line by the thickness of a reed to honor the sun's new angle. Birds continue still returning from the same direction, still angling inland. The cloud with the pale underside to the north keeps that pale. The swell returns after the same count. All these small separate agreements add up to a sentence the canoe can read without eyes. The boy brings out the paddle he is allowed to use when seas are forgiving. He dips it once beside the hull deep, slow, respectful, then lays it down again. He will carry the sea's weight in his arms soon enough. For now he learns that holding a line is a kind of kindness. By mid-morning the gray has become daylight without announcing its promotion. The navigator checks the star compass rail. Even though stars have left, the marks mean more than one sky. He feels the grooves and knows which house they slept under last night, and where they will sleep next. He lays his palm on the platform and listens, then lifts it and looks ahead. The horizon is honest, the canoe hums. Noon has been measured by fingertip and shadow. Birds draw their letters. The road of water stays open. Afternoon lays a warm hand on the sail. Shadows thin. The water turns from slate to a blue that remembers green. Wine keeps a small promise, neither stingy nor bold. The canoe's two hulls part the sea with soft twin whispers. The lashings sing a low line you feel more than hear. A thread at the sail's leech has grown proud. Nothing urgent, just a stitch asking to be noticed. The navigator nods to the crewman nearest the yard. He loosens a palm of sheet so the cloth relaxes, then ties himself with a short safety loop to the beam. Out comes a bone needle smooth as a shell's lip, and a length of sennit cord rubbed with a touch of coconut oil. The needle slides in and out along the edge. Each bite is small. Each pull is steady. He sets the new stitch to follow the old rhythm, not to argue with it. When the mending meets the next seam, he ties a flat knot the wind cannot bully and presses it with his thumb. The cloth answers with a clean curve. The sheet takes its breath again, and the sail resumes its quiet work. Color teaches as surely as stars. The navigator crouches near the bow and watches the water's face. Far ahead, a faint band looks less blue, more pale, like jade milked with light. Water over a shoal often carries that color, sand speaking upward through depth. He lowers his gaze to the sea near at hand. The hue here stays deep and honest. He straightens and looks forward again. The pale band is not moving with the swells as quickly as the surrounding blue. That too can be a hint. He lifts a hand to the helmsman and traces a small arc in the air, just to finger widths of new course. The paddle obeys with the grace of a bow. The canoe slides a little more to starboard. The milky band widens and then veers away like a polite passerby. A commentary belongs here, said without hurry. Before lead lines and painted charts, many navigators read water by tint, by the way-like return from the surface, and by the shape of waves over hidden ground. Even small changes, a softer chop, a pale stroke, a line of brown where silt lifts could whisper the presence of sand tongues or reef shoulders. Sight and patience did the measuring. Clouds gather into a traveling shade. The sun steps behind them and lets the world cool a little. Air smells closer like damp pandanus and distant rain. The sail's belly softens. The sheetman lets a thumb of line live freer. A thin dark line rides the far water, straight as a thought. A squall has decided to visit. There is no alarm, only rearrangement. Mats lift from the platform and hang along the windward rail to make a brief wall. Gourds settle under the outer beam. The crew ties back the sail to a smaller shape that cannot complain. The navigator checks lashings along the cross beams once more with the back of his hand. Knots are still friendly. The squall arrives not with noise, but with presence. First, a peppering of cold drops that sow themselves across skin. Then a short, polite rush. Water leaps from the sail's lower edge in a clear sheet. The crew set gourds under the drip and smile at this small fortune. Salt leaves faces and hair. The canoe wears fresh water for a moment, then lets it go. The child laughs once, and then covers his grin with the back of his hand, as he has been taught to keep joy from becoming boast. Rain slides away as suddenly as it came. Sun returns with a glance like approval. Everything shines briefly, then returns to work. Mats go to the platform, laid open to dry. They exhale the damp from their weave. The navigator turns one, then another, so both faces learn the sun. He shakes water from the steering paddle's grip and rubs the wood with a cloth that carries a breath of oil. Salt is a memory again, not a coat. Wine trails off after the squall as if content with the errand. The sail rests in a narrow fold, tied with two simple turns. The canoe must hold its line by swell alone for a time. This is not a loss, it is a practice. The navigator settles by the steering paddle. He closes his eyes, then opens them. He reads the low, long roller that has kept them honest all day, the one that presses the starboard hull with a patient hand. He matches the canoe to that hand, not with force, but with weight. A slight lean here, a finger more blade there. Under the lashings, the quiet drum marks a beat he can keep even if clouds borrow the sky all afternoon. The sea writes more lines for those who look. A subtle texture cat's pose of darker ripples shows a narrow vein of breeze slanting across the larger swell. He allows the nose to meet that vein at a kind angle, stealing a little push without giving up the main path. A patch of smooth water lies beyond like cloth pulled tight. Smooth often means wind is shy there. He turns a breath early and leaves the smoothness to others. Little choices keep the big idea safe. A crewman checks the bailer, though the hulls are near dry. Ritual loves small tasks. Another rubs a few lashings with fresh oil where the rain kissed them. Wet rope can stiffen if it is ignored. The boy fans the mats and sings under his breath a song that lists the names of winds he has learned, the gentle one that comes not every day, the playful one that argues with sails, the dignified one that does not hurry for anyone. He reaches the end of the list and starts again, slower this time, like a lullaby for strings and beams. The navigator tows a small knot at the platform's edge and readies it cleaner. His shell pendant lies cool against his chest from the rain. He raises his face. A wide ceiling of cloud has taken the sky for itself, no sunblade, no hard shadows, no bright seam where sea meets light. It is an honest gray that seeks no drama. He smiles. This is when memory works without lanterns. He lifts his left hand and sets the moon's earlier lesson into his shoulder out of habit even though the moon has gone. He keeps the long swell under the right ribs and counts the smaller beat as if tapping the rim of A drone? He checks watercolor once more. The earlier pale band has moved behind, thin as a thought recalled after its moment. Ahead the blue holds steady. A few brown flecks drift by tiny leaves and seeds, washed out by a river somewhere. They do not mark distance, but they say land exists in a direction that makes sense with birds and swell. He approves of the world's agreement. When the mats are dry, they stack light and flat. A quick brush clears the platform of grit. The gourds are half a finger heavier from rain and are wrapped in cloth to keep the sun from scalding them. The crewman who patched the sail touches his seam once more and nods. The thread lies quiet, its pride satisfied. Cloud light thickens toward late afternoon. The canoe hums without sail, guided by the steadiness of water's long lines and the weight of hands that know their work. The child sleeps with a paddle under his arm like a promised pie. The helmsman hums the lowest part of a planting chant so softly that even the deck must lean close to hear. The navigator eats a strip of dried fish and a thumb of breadfruit, drinks 2 sips of collected rain, and wipes a drop from his lip with a finger. He imagines the first star that will pierce this ceiling when it decides to loosen. He names it in his head, does not speak, and slides his fingers along the star compass rail to the knots that will matter next. Clouds can borrow the sky, but the rail does not forget. The steerage remains a conversation with swell only. The paddle moves little. The canoe reads. A gourd rattle stays lazy. Lashings keep their tone. Between hulls, the sea runs like silk being drawn through a hand. Everything answers simple. Toward the west, a thin thinning suggests the lid will lift in an hour or two. The navigator blinks slow and lets his shoulders fall. The line holds. The road stays open. Evening returns by lifting a lid. The western sky thins sooner than the rest, and a first light pricks through as if it had been waiting patiently behind cloth. The crew notices in small ways. One shoulder loosens, one breath lengthens. The navigator sets his palm on the platform and feels the long roller steady beneath. He looks to the soft gap in the cloud and names the first star without voice. It rises in the notch he expected. He slides his fingers one mark along the rail. The course has kept its promise. Another star answers above the bowl, then a third to the right like a friendly witness. The ceiling opens in quiet squares until the whole page of sky is readable again. The crab claw remains folded. The wind is a wind tonight. The canoe keeps faith with swell and with the slow touch of the steering blade. Under the lashings, the drumbeat has the same patient tone as last night's watch. He smiles because sameness is a kind of gift on long water. Smell reaches the canoe before sight can. It arrives as a thin sweetness that does not belong to open sea leaf and soa, and a hint of birds' roosts far off. The helmsman tilts his head as if listening with his nose. A crewman nods once, adding nothing. They do not turn. They let the line continue until more clues agree. Birds glide where birds sleep on air itself. A frigate bird hangs in the last light as if hooked to the moon. Turns sketch low curves and then rise to a height that suggests they are choosing a place rather than searching for one. Their arcs repeat from the same quarter, then tighten. The navigator keeps count with his thumb against the rail. After the third repeat, he gives the paddle the most modest suggestion to lean a breath toward that memory in the wind. The nose yields a finger's width, no more. The sea offers its own counsel. He listens for a faint echo returning through the platform, reflected energy from something hard, far ahead and slightly to port. It comes after the count he learned at first grey, perhaps a touch sooner now. He waits for a second echo and hears it in the same place. He marks it with breath rather than chalk, and lets the canoe move a thumb more toward the sound. A change in water's color joins the chorus. Not a bright milk this time, but a subtle lightening, as if someone had slipped a little river into the blue far off. He keeps the canoe's nose just outside that paler band. A line of foam shows at the horizon like thin linen laid flat and then lifted. Breakers on a reef have that way of writing without a pen. He does not let the canoe aim for that white. He keeps to the dark path that runs parallel. The crew prepares for patience. The sail stays tied. A sea anchor, a woven mat with a short line, goes over the bow to hold the nose to the long roller if wind forgets itself. The line runs easy over the forebeam. A knot in the middle keeps it from slipping too far. A gourd rattle is moved to the forward lashing so it will whisper if the mat tugs too strong. Baskets rest inboard, cords checked, gourds wrapped. A child wakes and blinks toward the pale line and is gently turned to look at stars instead. Voices stay small. A chant would be welcome, but the night has offered its own rhythm, the hush between waves, the faint scrape of line on wood, the sigh of breath. The navigator names his next star houses in order in his head, this one to keep the path, that one to keep the latitude, the other to promise a turn when done agrees. He sets the star at his shoulder as the moon taught him, and keeps the long drummer under the seine rib. Tihi-canoe follows with the willing calm of a practiced partner. They eat a little. Roasted taro breaks with the soft sound of torn bread. Dried fish offers its salt. Water passes mouth to mouth with the care people give shared things. Salt on skin turns to cool once the sun's power has gone. A mat covers the child's feet. Someone tucks the leaf bundle of food tighter under the beam. Someone else moves a hook line so it will not find toes. The reef's voice grows a shade louder, not loud, only more sure of itself. It speaks in a low, unbroken line, different from wind chop, different from the boat's own noise. The navigator turns the paddle an inch so the sea anchor holds the nose a touch farther from that white band, and the canoe drifts along the reef rather than toward it. He watches for pauses by feel and by a break in the foam, a notch in the sound, a river of darker water moving seaward. One appears a smooth seam interrupting the white, a flume where lagoon water pours outward. He notes its angle, marks a star above it, and does not enter. Night turns even a known doorway into a puzzle. Morning is safer for thresholds. Stars deepen. The bright ones take their places as if seating for a familiar performance. He measures one with fist and thumb and checks it against the rail's notch. He hums once to himself for the pure pleasure of confirmation. He remembers another voyage when this same star rose over a different reef far away, and how that crew also waited outside until birds woke fully and cloud took color. Waiting has a flavor. It tastes like restraint and water and warm rope on the pond. The canoe makes a comfortable bed out of lines and light. The sea anchor keeps it from wandering. The steering paddle rests, its blade still in the water like a foot trailing in a stream. Lashings settle with tiny adjustments. He feels more than hears. A flying fish startles once. skittering bright notes across the surface. It lands, and silence arranges itself again. The navigator leans back against the beam and watches a star he has chosen as a clock. When it reaches a certain house, Dong will push a finger under the edge of night. He rubs a small spot on the deck where oil and salt make a darker oval the habit hand place. He thinks of the path behind, he thinks of the path to come. He does not think of numbers or names of places. He thinks of birds that will draw guidance in the air and clouds that will collect color, and the sound of water over coral heads that will flatten in daylight from long to wide. He leaves one instruction behind his teeth for first light. Bring the canoe across the pale scene where the reef's voice breaks. Follow the seaward river inward while the tide is friendly. And then let the canoe rest inside a ring of quiet water. He will say the words when he can lay a finger on the cut through the white, and the sun can lay a finger there too. Stars keep watch with him. The crew sleeps in turns, one always awake, trimming thought and line. The child's breathing becomes the metronome everything else falls into. The gourd rattle remains shy. The mat that drags ahead holds the nose where it should. Time moves, but not in a way that needs announcing. The first thin promise of gray shows again in the east. He tastes the air and finds leaf and soil a little stronger. Birds lift off the dark like ideas. The reef line turns from white to a dull pale, the past shows a softer stripe. He will wait a bit more, enough to let shape sharpen, and the tide fall into a kinder phase. He lifts the sea anchor by hand, letting water leave it without scold, and coils the line on the forebeam. He touches the rail's notch, moves one finger to the next, and sets the paddle for a breath later. The canoe gathers itself without making a point of it. Before the work of daylight begins, he looks up once more. The stars that taught the night have started their retreat, but they still sit where he last checked. He thanks them in the language of bone and habit. He lays a palm flat on the platform to thank the canoe in the same language. He nods toward the crewman on the sheet and says to small words. The sheet answers the plan. The bow points not at the white, but at the gap where water goes out, and will let them in when the sun finishes erasing the last of worry. The night voyage closes the way a careful hand closes a lid. Slow, square, content. The ocean remains large, the canoe remains small. Both keep their dignity. The line they held all night has brought them to a threshold, and thresholds prefer patient friends. Now these quiet hours can keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.